First up is Zeus versus Hulk. Sometimes readers need a little bit of a reminder of the power hierarchy in the Marvel Universe, and sometimes it's the characters themselves who need reminding. The Hulk went up to Mount Olympus demanding Zeus to fix stuff after a big war, and Zeus just wasn't having it and zapped Hulk down hard. But Hulk is tough, so even after getting hit by that mega lightning bolt, he kept on going. Hulk threw some serious punches at Zeus, but Zeus hit back even harder, like super hard. Hulk got sent flying off of Mount Olympus, but even that wasn't enough. He crawled all the way back up to Zeus for round 2. Zeus, no longer playing around, smacks the Hulk down so dang hard that he can't help but spew green bodily fluids all over the place. I mean, imagine shattering the Hulk's ribcage so hard that his lungs collapse. Good lord. Then Zeus really lays into the Hulk, making him crash down into the mountain, where he got stuck on a rock and knocking him unconscious. When the Hulk finally awoke, he found himself chained up and left for vultures to chow down on him. Zeus was gloating, watching Hulk's super healing power keep him alive, while the birds had a feast on his stomach. Classic Zeus. At number 9 is Daken versus the Punisher. One of the most brutal fights ever involves Daken, Wolverine's son. So Daken goes all out on Punisher, not holding back on an ounce of his brutality. It's a story where the Punisher gets cornered and Daken just goes berserk on him. You see, at first, the Punisher starts off okay and takes control of the fight pretty early, but that doesn't last very long. The Punisher quickly gets overwhelmed by Daken and meets one of the most brutal ends I have ever seen in comics. Because basically, Daken just chops him up into pieces, limb by limb, and then insults him before kicking those pieces off of the rooftop. It's gruesome. Now the scary part is that Daken doesn't show any remorse or regret for what he's done. He's just like that, a troublemaker who doesn't hold back. And this wasn't just some trick or plan by Punisher to fake his demise. No, this is the real deal. Later on, Daken kind of changes sides, tries to be a hero, and joins the Wolverine family. But he's got this dark side that pops up from time to time. Like for example, that one time when he snuck off to Krakoa to get vengeance on those who hurt innocent mutants. He's got this cruelty streak that sets him apart, making him one of the deadliest fighters in Marvel. So even though he's on the hero team now, don't forget that Daken can be seriously deadly when he wants to be. If you're enjoying this video so far, please support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. At number 8 is Thanos versus Black Bolt. Now, Thanos in the MCU is a pretty tough guy, able to take on Cap, Thor, and Iron Man at the same freaking time, but in the comics? He's an even bigger deal. Now let's talk about Black Bolt. He's an Inhuman and his voice is crazy powerful. I'm talking one whisper from this guy can vaporize Doctor Strange and the Sentry. Yeah, the Sentry, who's basically Marvel's version of Superman. And get this, he can even wipe out an entire planets just by using his voice. Now, this guy's voice is so lethal, he's been trained not to speak, like, ever. Not even in his sleep. That's how intense it is. Now, what happens when he tries to let loose on Thanos? Spoiler alert? Nothing. Not a scratch. Thanos barely flinches. It's like watching a bug bounce off of a windshield. Thanos takes a full-on shout from Black Bolt at point-blank range, and you know what happens? Thanos sticks his arm out, wraps his hand around Black Bolt's mouth, silencing him. Then he silences Black Bolt for good, slamming his face into the ground beneath him repeatedly. Black Bolt, as tough as he is, has no shot here. Thanos barely even broke a sweat. It's a brutal beatdown, a real mismatch, as Thanos came out without a scratch.
Number 7, Captain America versus Captain America. We all battle our own inner demons once in a while, but for Captain America, he had to literally face his own evil self. In the Secret Empire storyline, a Hydra-loving version of Steve Rogers, lovingly referred to as Stevel, had managed to take control of the entire United States, committing seriously heinous acts to ensure his success. Luckily, with the help of Kobik and Captain America's family of heroes, the regular Steve Rogers that we know and love managed to make it back to our reality, and he and Stevel finally went head-to-head in Secret Empire number 10. While Stevel had a completely different ideology than Captain America, he still retained all of his skill and tactical know-how, and was armed with a very Iron Man-like armor, which made this fight one of the most intense hand-to-hand fights I have ever seen in a comic in a hot minute. While the two are evenly matched in terms of skill, Stevel is evil, and Cap is decidedly not evil, which means that Captain America is very much worthy of wielding the hammer of Thor, and Stevel was only capable of wielding disappointment.
I was not expecting this next one, which is quite a twist. Or rather, I wouldn't have been expecting it if I hadn't read it later. 2023 for me was a year of mainly focusing on indie comics in terms of my collection, seeing if I could make it like a whole year without really collecting mainly superhero comics from the big two myself, instead focusing on collecting books from smaller or still large but honestly alternative publishers. Dynamite, Image, IDW, and even still some like really indie like self-published stuff. For the most part, I succeeded in last year's New Year's resolution. Yay, in regards to this, but the downside was I ended up being more behind on my big two superhero stuff, like X-Men. As such, I already kind of knew the events of the Hellfire Gala before I actually read that Hellfire Gala. Even knowing it though, it was still shocking to behold Nimrod flying in and pretty much insta-killing, for the most part, the newly announced X-Men team. Honestly, poor Dazzler. I was so excited about Dazzler joining that team, and then when I heard that that happened, I was like, ah. And then when I read it, I was like, ah. Contrary to the last point, this one was very unexpected. Obviously with Hellfire Gala, I kind of already knew what happened even though I hadn't read it yet. This one caught me unawares. It's because it was one of the first fights that we saw during the Ten of Swords Otherworld tournament, and I honestly had expectations going into this event that were instantly shattered here. Pardon my pun there. Sorry, Betsy. In this first fight of the tournament, Captain Britain's Betsy Braddock was forced to face off against Arakko's champion, Iska the Unbeaten. Iska gets her name from her mutant powers, which prevent her from ever losing. And while I expected that Betsy might be the first one to, pull off such a feat and make Iska lose, since she was the hero in this scenario and Iska, at the time, was the villain, it turns out I was wrong. And true to her name, Iska made short work of Betsy, literally shattering her into thousands of pieces. Yeah, I didn't see that one coming. I feel like Wait, What Just Happened pretty much sums up Ten of Swords as an event. It's just bonkers. Bonkers, I think, in a good way, but that's my opinion. Another battle that I wasn't expecting to go how it did was the one with Uranos versus, well, pretty much all of Arakko, to be honest. But more specifically for this point, I'm talking about the Eternals villain facing off against Magneto, who is of course usually a villain of the X-Men, but in X-Men Red is really more of a hero here. Magneto here seemingly holds his own at first, but in the end has his heart removed by Uranos and is left for dead. It's also a pretty quick fight. It's like brutally quick. It's a seemingly gruesome end for a long-standing character, but what's even more intense is it would shortly after, in the same issue, be revealed that Magneto was so committed to getting revenge here, so willful, that he refused to die, using his powers in place of his heart to move his blood through his body and will himself to keep going so he could live to get revenge on Uranos for what he had done to mutant kind and planet Arakko. Heartless Magneto is scary Magneto. This death of a character I'm about to touch upon, though, is an honest, real one. Synch was long dead up until recently in the comics. Thankfully, he was one of the first that the mutant nation of Krakoa brought back, prioritizing his resurrection so that he might be acclimatized and prepared for his mission in the Vault, alongside Darwin and Laura Kinney's Wolverine. Before his mission there, however, which he miraculously survived, he gave his life to protect others when Emma Frost's school for young mutants was attacked. This was his previous death. Tragic. Generation X, let's go. What makes his death in Generation X even more brutal is the fact that Synch gave his life to basically save other human kids who also attended the school, even though many of the human kids there were pretty unkind to the mutant student body they were forced to share the school with. Another heartbreaking defeat that I found to be extremely shocking and brutal was the loss of Captain Kate Pryde. And Lockheed, poor Lockheed, though fortunately Lockheed, his life was not lost. We must protect Lockheed at all costs. This all went down in the first volume of Marauders, a series that constantly pushed the envelope I felt for what we expect of these characters while also staying true to them. Kate was the leader of this new Marauders team, making her pretty much the main character of the series, so seeing her lost at sea at the hands of Sebastian Shaw was devastating, especially when you consider this happened only in issue 6 of this series. Yeah, just taking everything we thought we knew about what was going on and flipping the script. While a lot of the times we talk about the events of House of M and M-Day as being like the worst things mutants have ever lived through, there was a moment that was even more a brutal brutal loss for Marvel Mutants in comparison, I'd wager. One that also cost millions of lives. Millions of lives. I think actually M-Day only cost million, and not even lives, just depowering individuals. But in this case, these people were wiped off the face of the earth. Cassandra Nova returned to get her revenge and ended up killing Donald Trask III in one of the most disturbing ways I've ever seen in a comic, while also merging with him, able to use his voice after his death to command the Master Mold and Sentinels. During the E is for Extinction story, Nova unleashed these Sentinels on Genosha, resulting in what we refer to today as the Genosian Massacre, which cost mutant kind an estimated 16 million lives. Yeah. Doing far more damage than M-Day and making M-Day even more devastating as a result when it did happen, since the mutants' numbers were already severely reduced going into the House of M event because of course, the Genosian Massacre. Like, if the Genosian Massacre hadn't have happened, we would have had more mutants even after M-Day because there'd just be more people in general. So even though many of them would have been depowered, we still would have had a lot left.
Starting us off today, if we want to talk about brutal and we want to talk about comic books, then there is no better place to look than the 90s. Comic books in the 90s just happened to have this gritty, grunge, extreme thing going on, and the last Avengers story was a pretty good example of this. With this really cool, chunky, gritty art style, it told a story set in the future with a new team of Avengers. Just kidding though, because they get completely wiped out within the first few pages. The current team of Avengers of this alternate future and their base are completely wiped out by an absolutely massive explosion caused by Ultron 59. Now Ultron basically then challenges Hank Pym and the OG Avengers to a final fight against himself, Kang, and the Grim Reaper. The thing is, there were not that many of the original Avengers left, with a lot of them being wiped out by villains or even by their own fellow Avengers. For example, Tigra was torn asunder by the Hulk, who had basically gone bananas, and then he and Wonder Man got into a massive fight that wiped them both off the face of the earth. The Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver both lost their lives at the hands of the Vision, and the rest of the team just scattered. But while the 90s were characterized by the extreme, the early 2010s were characterized by zombies. It's just what happened. Probably because of The Walking Dead, to be perfectly honest. Marvel absolutely jumped on that with Marvel Universe versus the Avengers. Now this story, told from the perspective of Hawkeye, saw a plague turn people into intelligent zombies. The Avengers led any effort they could to try and contain the virus and save the populace. But when society collapses, it kinda seems to bring out the worst in people. The Avengers' efforts to save the world were consistently thwarted by infection, greed, and Doctor Doom, which I don't think anyone is too surprised about. It had a very grim ending, with most of the Avengers being wiped out entirely or going into hiding to survive any way they could, with Hawkeye's skull being smashed by an infected Thor. It's pretty rough. But moving on, during Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, one of the greatest Avengers runs ever, these things called incursions started to happen, orchestrated by the Beyonders. Essentially, two universes would crash together, destroying them both, and the focal point for that crash was the Earth itself. When the incursions started to threaten the multiverse, Namor the Submariner basically found multiple different ways to go about wiping out any alternate Earths that appeared in order to save Earth 616 and save both universes. That's pretty brutal on its own, especially when he teamed up with Thanos and his Black Order, plus some powerful additions. But then on top of that, the Avengers essentially got split right down the middle. On one side, Iron Man and his group were trying to save their Earth, while Captain America's faction essentially wanted to stop the amount of destruction caused by Iron Man and his side. Meanwhile, you've got extremely powerful cosmic heroes being wiped out by the Beyonders left, right, and center, and it all came to a climax as pretty much all of reality got destroyed and a massive battle between colliding Earths and opposing Avengers took place. Now, it's never a good time when friends turn on friends. While there was a clear winner in terms of who won the conflict in Marvel Comics' Civil War event, that being Tony Stark, in the grand scheme of things, there really wasn't any winner at all. The Civil War split the entire superhuman community down the middle. Heroes allied with villains, friends turned on friends, people were manipulated into joining a side, and a few of those people even passed away, all for an act that would require the registration and regulation of superhuman individuals following a completely avoidable superhuman caused catastrophe. And while you had Tony Stark coming out on top, he made a lot of enemies along the way, including Spider-Man, and I don't think he ever intended for the death of Steve Rogers. Also, after he came out on top, he was put in charge of S.H.I.E.L.D. and did a spectacularly bad job, leading to Norman Osborn, of all people, to take over, ushering in a whole lot of bad. I don't think anyone really came out from Civil War feeling particularly great. But the Avengers don't just exist in comic book form. Sure, the movies are never as vicious as the comics can be, but there is at least one occasion where things went pretty bad for our cinematic heroes. In the MCU, most of the movies follow a pretty simple idea of a hero facing and eventually defeating a villain, coming out triumphant by the end of the film, completing an arc. Even if the villain survives to continue into other films in the cinematic universe, they are still usually defeated by the hero at the end of their debut movie. Well, when we were given the Avengers Infinity War, it marked the first time in the MCU when the heroes, and furthermore, all the heroes together, officially lost by the end of the movie. Despite their best divided efforts to stop Thanos from acquiring all the Infinity Stones to complete his mission, he still managed to put them all into his big golden gauntlet and snap out half of the life in the universe. It left the heroes in shock of what even just happened as they watched their friends turn to dust, and when we meet them all in the next film, Avengers Endgame, they've all been left reeling and trying to just move on from such a massive defeat, which, sure, I guess led to one of their greatest victories, but whatever.
Number 6. Jean Grey versus Cordyceps Jones. Jean Grey is a force to be reckoned with, and not just because she was the host for the Phoenix Force either. Even without the insane power of the Phoenix Force bonded to her, Jean has actually done some pretty impossible things, let's be real, including almost single-handedly defeating Null during the Absolute Carnage event. Yeah, while she ultimately didn't manage that brutal takedown on her own, she was at the very least integral to beating him down the line by helping to uncover the God of the Symbiote's weakness. Jean has been an unstoppable force many times over while serving on the X-Men team. She truly showed how dangerous it is to mess with her when going up against Cordyceps Jones. She defeated him and his entire casino simply by trapping him in an illusion while the X-Men basically did their thing. From within that illusion, Jean says it best when it comes to just how powerful she is truly in issue 11 of the recent X-Men series. I was Marvel Girl, now I'm Jean Grey. I did not even let the Phoenix command me, so honestly, what chance do you have?
Next on the list is Null versus the Sentry. In King in Black #1, Null shows up on Earth with an army of symbiote dragons, and the Avengers are all like, oh boy, we're in trouble. The Avengers try their best to fight back, but Null is just on another level. On top of the symbiote freaking dragons, he brings these huge Celestials covered in symbiotes and goes after Earth, saying he's looking after a guy named Dylan Brock. Even when the Avengers try to bring in the Sentry, their big gun, Null straight up tears him apart and absorbs his insane powers. It's a shocker because Sentry is a powerhouse. I mean, this guy's strength is off the charts, like millions of exploding suns strong. In fact, the dude has ripped gods in half himself. So for Null to just dismantle him like he's nothing, and then to make matters worse, Null covers the Earth in symbiotes, blocks out the sun, and plunges everything into darkness. This Null dude is no joke. He proved he's basically the strongest being in the whole Marvel universe, and taking him down is gonna be one seriously tough job.
Number 4. Sentry versus Ares. Speaking of people ripping each other in half, Sentry is the greatest hero that Earth forgot. In the Marvel universe, as AJ was saying, he's basically like the Marvel equivalent of DC's Superman, but quite a bit more messed up when it comes to his origins and at times his approach to fighting baddies, to be honest. In fact, Sentry himself isn't only one of Earth's greatest and most powerful heroes, he's actually also one of its most powerful and terrifying villains, as residing within him is also the persona of the Void. The Void is the reason the whole world basically had to forget that Bob Reynolds was the hero known as the Sentry. In forgetting who the Sentry was, he disappeared, and with him so did his evil alter ego, the most villainous and deadly Void. Sentry, before getting himself ripped in half by Null, managed to rip Ares in half. That's how powerful and violent he can be. Of course, him getting ripped in half by Null does make sense, because that feels like karma to me, my friends.
Next up is Deadpool vs. the Hulk. Okay, so technically speaking, this fight didn't actually happen, as this was all a twisted fantasy made up by Deadpool in his head, but it doesn't make it any less brutally mesmerizing. Deadpool, the merc with the mouth that just won't quit, is brainstorming story ideas with a comic creator in a She-Hulk-esque type sequence where they're bouncing ideas back and forth trying to come up with something fresh and exciting for Deadpool's next adventure. About Deadpool's resilience, it's pretty insane. I mean, the dude has faced craziest stuff and managed to bounce back. Like, he's sort of like a cat with 9 lives, except he's got an endless supply of lives. Boat impalement, getting ripped apart by superheroes, getting turned into a cape, you name it, he's probably survived it. So, in this story chat thing, Deadpool suggests fighting the Big Green Hulk, and lo and behold, the comic shows Hulk literally tearing Deadpool clean in half like he's made of paper mache. In one of Hulk's hands is Deadpool's legs and most of his torso, and in the other hand is his still screaming skull, each segment still connected by cords of his stretched tissue and his freaking spinal column. It's the kind of stuff that makes you wince and go ouch, but it's unfortunately all in Deadpool's head. Like a what if scenario that never really happened, but it showcases just how tough and imaginative this guy can be, even when facing down the Hulk.
Number 2, Taskmaster vs. Hyperion. This one is wild, especially when you consider the beating that Taskmaster was allowing himself to take. That's right, while it might seem like Taskmaster is on the losing end of this fight here, he actually does come out on top in the end, despite getting beat down consistently throughout the fight. Spoilers. We get to learn about how he actually had this one in the bag through flashbacks that we're shown during the fight, where it's revealed that Taskmaster's preparation was basically the key here. In the Taskmaster series, in issue number 2, Taskmaster is working with Nick Fury to clear his name, but Tony Masters has to basically do something for Fury first. He needs to collect the kinesic signatures of 3 important individuals, one of whom is actually Phil Coulson. But to get to Phil, he has to go through Hyperion, and in order to do that, he has to first bring Hyperion's guard down, in essence allowing Hyperion to basically punch his way through Taskmaster so that he can do that. Ouch. Taskmaster, through feigning a loss though, is able to get Hyperion to drop his guard enough to get off a single powerful boomerang arrow shot, a Hawkeye classic to be sure, tipped with Hyperion's one weakness based on Fury's intel. So if you ever need to defeat Hyperion, just make sure you keep that on your person at all times.
Coming up next is Gambit vs. Captain America. Gambit, the X-Men dude who could turn anything into an explosive, has this epic face-off with Captain America in AVX versus number 2. So here's the deal. Cap is hunting down Hope Summers in the Savage Land, trying to prevent her from hooking up with the destructive Phoenix Force, while the X-Men on the other hand, they're all about protecting Hope, thinking that the Phoenix could be a win for mutants. Enter Gambit and Cap. Clash time, baby. When Cap and Gambit go at it, Cap's not sweating it, and even when Gambit takes his mitts off on Cap's vibranium shield, charging the shield and sending it towards Cap like a bomb, Cap dodges it easily, and the vibranium shield doesn't combust per se, but boy oh boy does it leave an explosion like you've never seen before. Then Gambit gets sneaky, charging up Cap's superhero suit, which Cap thought was off limits. Gambit essentially turns Cap's entire outfit into a ticking time bomb. Cap's duds get trashed, and he gets serious, unrelentingly advancing towards Gambit, who's throwing everything he has at him at this point. And then that's when we get the grand finale. Boom! Cap's fist connects with Gambit's jaw, he decks Gambit hard, ending the tussle right there. Cap thought it would initially be a walk in the park, but Gambit pulled a pretty sneaky move. Now even though Cap won here, Gambit made him break a sweat, to be sure. That's how a simple tactic and a surprise move turned up the heat in this showdown.
Coming in at number 10 is Ultimate Captain America vs. Kleiser. The Ultimate Universe has a ton of absolutely insane moments to choose from, all of which would work for this list. But for this point, I want to talk about a time when Captain America went a little bit overboard. In Ultimates number 12, Captain America is caught in a fight with Herr Kleiser, an old German rival. Just for better context, Herr Kleiser is actually one of the Chitauri, and they launched a full-scale invasion of Earth in the modern day, which gave Captain America the opportunity to put Kleiser down for good. So, Herr Kleiser is naked following a fiery explosion, and the two are just going punch for punch, with Kleiser even getting the upper hand and ranting about eating Steve's face, which is weird. After Nick Fury tries to intervene and Kleiser tries to make Cap surrender, Captain America finally gets the upper hand. Now, Captain America pins Kleiser down and lifts his shield above his head and slams it down edge first right into Kleiser's chest, basically slicing him in half. Then, Captain America insults the entire country of France, and it's really weird. Number 9, Captain Marvel vs. Thor. During quite possibly Carol Danvers' darkest storyline, The Last Avenger, taking place in Captain Marvel Volume 10, number 12, a living suit controlled by a cosmic villain is forcing Carol to wipe out the Avengers. Issue number 12 opens with Captain Marvel catching Thor, the God of Thunder, off of guard, launching a surprise attack to take him down. But Thor is a god, and it's going to take quite a lot more to bring him down. The two start a battle that sees them tear across the entire planet, from Greenland to Kansas to the middle of the Pacific Ocean and then to space. Thor barely has any idea what's going on, and Carol was just going ham. Carol managed to use an energy beam to send Mjolnir extremely far away into space, and then another massive blast, she managed to incapacitate the God of Thunder and current ruler of Asgard. The final pages of this issue then show Carol displaying Thor's detached head. So yeah, a pretty brutal battle indeed. But Number 8. Iron Man vs. the Mandarin. Nothing seems to ever get as intense, as destructive, as a battle between a hero and their nemesis. And in Invincible Iron Man number 28, Tony Stark and what is arguably his most well-known villain, the Mandarin, go head to head. At this time, Mandarin was carrying out a plan to release the extremist virus into the population that would wipe out anyone without a very specific genetic makeup, which was only a very small number of the population, and it would grant those who remained superpowers. Iron Man came into this fight hot and did not cool off until it was over. This fight was a knockdown dragout fight that saw Iron Man rip the 10 rings from Mandarin's spine, engage in a battle of fisticuffs with this powerful old man, and then finally Stark repulsorayed the ever-living lights out of the Mandarin, who then proceeded to sick the extremist virus on Stark, who used a refrigerant to not only halt the virus, but also freeze Mandarin solid. Iron Man then promptly passed out.
Next on the list is Captain America vs. the Punisher. During the Civil War comic arc, the Punisher was recruited on Captain America's team for all of like 10 minutes. That all went up in smoke when a couple of goons showed up asking to be a part of the rebellion. Cap was about to let them on the team, but then the Punisher lit him up with bullets before anything could be made official. And that's when Cap snapped. He wailed on Frank Castle like nobody's business. The Punisher tried to reason between punches. After all, they were fighting over the lives of criminals, but that did not stop Cap from giving Castle the beating of a lifetime. Fists, feet, knees, shield, you name it. Treated Frank like a punching bag. But the entire time, it was clear that this fight was a one-sided massacre, with Frank not throwing a single punch and Steve not pulling any of them. Then the moment came when Steve demanded Frank fight back, to which the Punisher replied, "Not against you," ending the fight when Cap walked away. Spider-Man theorized something about Cap being the reason why Frank became a soldier during Vietnam, which is more or less right. The Punisher exists to, well, punish people. He fights against evil, and so Captain America, being the closest thing to an actual good, noble person as anybody has ever seen, and so there was nothing for Frank Castle to punish. Captain America is the Punisher's hero, and so he just let Rogers have his way with him. Totally brutal.
Number 6. Thanos vs. the Champion. The comic story known as Thanos Quest essentially recounts exactly how Thanos went about acquiring the Infinity Stones from across the universe. Now, Thanos faced various challenges and challengers to acquire each stone. The Power Stone specifically was held by a guy known as the Champion, an elder of the universe just like the Collector and the Grand Master. Thanos came upon Champion on a planet that is constantly fought over by 5 different factions, and he's just here fighting scores of soldiers for his own amusement. Thanos just swoops in and challenges Champion to a fight, which the Elder accepts without a second thought. Now, while Champion, powered by the Infinity Stone, is much more powerful than Thanos, he's effectively an idiot. Like, he didn't even know that the stone was the thing giving him his unlimited power. Thanos outthought Champion multiple times, even allowing Champ to destroy the entire planet that they were fighting on. Thanos didn't beat up Champion, but he outsmarted and embarrassed the guy to the point Champion traded the power gem for a tow to another planet. What an idiot. Number 5. Doom vs. Thanos. Somehow, my fellow nerd compatriots have failed to recognize the sheer might and power that is Doom. Victor Von Doom has some of the best moments in Marvel Comics, and some of the beatings he puts down on other characters throughout are definitely worthy of this list. When Doom was ruler of Battleworld in the most recent Secret Wars event, very few could challenge his rule. But one who was foolish enough to do so was the Mad Titan Thanos. Thanos, being the rightly smug, extremely powerful Mad Titan he is, decides to challenge Doom straight on and refuses all of Doom's offers to just work with him. Thanos goes on a little rant about how when he had the Infinity Gauntlet, he acted as a god and he called Doom a weak god. In retort, Doom goes, and do you have the Infinity Gauntlet now? To which Thanos replies, I do not, but I remain Thanos the Great Tyrant, and for you, that will be enough. That was stupid because then, in one quick move, Doom simply plunges his hand into Thanos' chest, grabs a hold of his spine, and turns his body to ash as he says, that appears untrue. And it's just one of the greatest comic book panels I have ever seen. Number 4, Doom vs. Spider-Man. Carrying along the Dr. Doom hype train, in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, number 349 and 350, Dr. Doom and Spider-Man faced off, and it did not go well for the wall crawler. This time, Spidey was tracking a jewel thief named the Black Fox, but the Black Fox also had a certain Latvian ruler hot on his tail as well, as he had also bartered one of Victor Von Doom's family heirlooms, an emerald passed down to him by his late mother. And if you know anything about Dr. Doom, you never mess with anything related to Dr. Doom's mama. Doom flew to New York and just happened to catch up with the Black Fox at the same time that Spider-Man did. When Spidey intervened on the Black Fox's behalf, Dr. Doom did not hold back. Doom nonchalantly thrashed the web-slinger, leaving him with his costume in tatters and desperately scrambling away for his life. While he convinced Doom to allow him time to retrieve his family heirloom, Peter's severe beating had left him concussed, so much so that he even hallucinated Uncle Ben. The beating he took taught Spidey an important lesson about recognizing his limits. Coming in at number 3 today is Dr. Doom vs. Reed Richards. But alas, Dr. Doom is a villain, and therefore he has been defeated quite a few times. Quite possibly up there as one of the best one-on-one fights between Dr. Doom and his nemesis Mr. Fantastic came to us in Fantastic Four 1961 number 200, when these two college rivals resorted to a battle of fisticuffs. It was intense, with Doom characteristically monologuing the whole time. Even with Richards using his elastic body to try and overwhelm Doom, he fought Richards off, pummeling the man and eventually getting his metal gloves around Reed's throat. Unfortunately, one of Dr. Doom's biggest weaknesses is his own face. Thanks to his power source short-circuiting, the lock to Doom's mask was weakened, giving Reed the chance to pull it off, revealing Doom's face to a room full of mirrors. The lenses from Doom's mask couldn't protect him from the solar-powered intensified reflections and drove him just a little bit bonkers. On one hand, Dr. Doom beat the snot out of Reed Richards, but Reed psychologically crippled Dr. Doom in one fell move. Number 2, Black Tarantula vs. Spider-Man. So showing up in the Amazing Spider-Man 432, Black Tarantula seemingly attacks our spider hero out of nowhere, chucking half a chimney at him as his first move. Now, while Spider-Man tries to figure out who the heck this guy is and why he's even after Spider-Man, he is dodging out of the way of optic blasts, massive punches, and even his own webs do nothing as Tarantula just rips through them like tissue paper. Spider-Man even has a whole flashback about how Mary Jane wanted him to quit being Spider-Man, which was interrupted as Black Tarantula smashes through the wall Spider-Man was standing on. Spider-Man ends up floating down to an alley, and while he gets maybe 2 or 3 punches on Tarantula, when the villain gets his hands on Spider-Man's ankle, it's all over. He slams Peter between the alleyway walls, then down onto the pavement, and then he literally rips off Peter's mask, revealing his bruised face before telling him that he is sparing him so he can find Norman Osborn's missing child. But when he has done so, Spider-Man needs to leave New York for good. He then just walks off, leaving Peter in the fetal position, counting his injuries and thanking his lucky stars that he is alive. And finally, in a number 1 today is Moon Knight vs. Bushmaster. During Charlie Huston's 2006 run of the Moon Knight comics, in the 2nd issue, Mark Spector recalls how he ended up in a wheelchair. And it was all because of his little fight that he had with his nemesis, Bushmaster. In a flashback, the two are brutally fighting each other along the rooftops until Bushmaster savagely throws Mark off of the roof and he crashes down, bouncing on and off of a fire escape below, breaking and crushing both of his knees at the same time. It is brutal with a capital B, but this is Moon Knight. Thinking he'd won, Bushmaster comes in for the final hit, but Mark lands multiple crescent darts deep in the villain's neck. But then, Mark isn't finished. He then climbs on top of his nemesis and using another dart, he relieves Bushmaster of his own face, giving him a look that resembles what his mask used to be, a face with the skin removed. Imagine you are Batman. You're exhausted from having faced numerous escaped criminals, coming home to your secret cave and/or manor, only to find Bane, a hulking behemoth of a man, waiting to greet you. That would be terrifying, and that is exactly what happens in Batman number 497. Bane had organized a prison breakout in a secret attempt, sort of, to exhaust the Batman, to wind him down and break him down, so now, when this worn down, caught off guard Batman watches as Bane, pumps himself full of venom, the very thing that Bruce is also suffering withdrawals from, and is talking about how Bruce Wayne is just a mask, but a useless one, but his mask is very much useful, and then he's like, so you are familiar with venom, then you know what it can do. And he explains how his venom is way more potent, and then Batman gets a bit of a good speech, I'll give him that, it was pretty good, and he jumps into combat, and Bane's just nope, and he gives Batman an absolute thrashing, he's throwing Batman around and beating the tar out of the guy, and Batman is reliving all of his beatings up until this point, but they're nothing like this, and Alfred literally can't even handle it, and he goes crawling off to get the Bat family, and Batman is so exhausted that he can only try to dodge or just take the hits, but he goes to punch Bane, and it's nothing, and then Bane's you are already broken, and then Bane just wipes the floor, the ceilings, the walls with Bruce Wayne, breaks his back, and then he leaves him destroyed on the ground. It's sick, and it's sick and twisted, but it's awesome. Next up today, the Wolverine villain Cyber is, in my opinion, kind of underrated, but he's one of the only villains to actually terrify the mutant, with some adamantium-coated skin, toxic claws, and the power to track an individual's brain. Oh, and he's 9 feet tall and massive. In 1994's Wolverine number 79, Cyber is tracking down Wolverine in order to claim his adamantium bones, which he wants to then make a profit from. Unfortunately, at this time, Wolverine actually doesn't have the adamantium fused to his bones, so when the fight leads to him popping his bone claws, Cyber is a little bit disappointed. But instead of just walking away after this revelation, a cannon goes off nearby, and this gives Wolverine the opportunity to slash Cyber across the face. But as soon as the attack happens, Cyber catches Wolverine's fist, and in one stomp, he snaps Wolverine's claws in half. This event scarred Wolverine, but right after it, even made him question his ability as a hero without his adamantium. Marvel's Civil War number 2 is not the greatest, and it makes Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, to be someone who is just pretty unlikable. She just makes really weird decisions that get people hurt badly, like taking her Ultimates, admittedly a pretty powerful team, to take on Thanos thanks to an inhuman precognitive telling her that he will be there. Thanos shows up looking for the Cosmic Cube, which isn't actually on Earth, and Carol's tactic of just hit him as hard as you can, as fast as you can, probably sounds good, but it's also not really a plan at all. Carol absorbs an energy blast, the Human Torch is able to hit him with some fire, She-Hulk gets to pin him down, giving Carol and Dazzler the chance to blast him, and War Machine gets to lay down some fire. Thanos, sure, he's a little bruised, but he is a-okay, because when the Inhuman Medusa tries to use her hair to bind Thanos, he grabs that hair and flings her straight into War Machine, who accidentally fires a missile at She-Hulk. Then, in the chaos following that explosion, Thanos springs on War Machine, punching him straight through the chest with his massive, Mad Titan purple grimace fist. Then, the Ultimates are able to hit Thanos hard enough to end the fight, but damn. Now listen nerds, I gotta be honest, I never realized how vicious the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles can actually be. Taking place in IDW's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles issue number 44, the Turtles got split up. Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raph are on a mission to stop Krang from literally destroying all life on Earth using the Technodrome, leaving Donatello alone with his bow staff, facing off against Bebop and Rocksteady, who were given orders to send Donnie to the grave. Now that bow staff gets maybe one hit in before Rocksteady uses a sledgehammer sledgehammer to send Donnie flying, and Bebop just snaps the staff in half over his knee. Even with some assistance from Metalhead, Donnie is still at a disadvantage, and as he tries to escape, he gets a TV chucked at him, and then he gets slapped across the face with a computer keyboard. Then the pair just go to town on the lone turtle before Rocksteady uses that sledgehammer to crack open Donnie's shell. It is brutal. Luckily though, they are called off before they can fully finish the job. In the Infinite Crisis event, Connor Kent decides to answer the door, only to find Superboy Prime, who is starting to go a little bit off the deep end, and he decides to explain how he is the one true Superboy, and he wants to do that by fighting. And it is intense. Even Crypto gets involved, receiving a kick to the neck from Superboy Prime, and after that little crime against humanity, things get real. Prime beats the snot out of Connor Kent, chucking cars and all manner of things, but Connor had called in the Teen Titans, who in turn call in the Justice Society and the Doom Patrol. That's 28 different heroes. But this only makes things worse. Prime basically is like a kid, and he doesn't know how to control this power properly or even understand what is even happening right now. He starts wiping out heroes, accidentally taking the head off of Panther. He then rips off Risk's arm and wipes out Bushido and Baby Wildebeest with his heat vision while he is crying. It takes a handful of speedsters to then trap Prime in the Speed Force and end the fight.
At number 7, Punisher ends Doctor Doom. This one is absolutely brutal. You know, for as big as a bad guy as Doctor Doom is, it really doesn't take much for Frank Castle to absolutely obliterate him, and fairly easily too. This comes from the Punisher Kills the Marvel Universe comics. See, Castle isn't just up against Doom, but all of his Doom bots as well. However, they're all being remotely piloted by Doom, which means so long as Frank can fry the circuitry in Doom's noggin, the feedback loop easily takes care of the rest of the robots. Seriously, Doc, you should have used AI or Wi-Fi or something. All it takes is for Frank to slap a magnetic landmine on Dr. Doom's metal face, making his entire head burst into flames. But even a direct explosion to the face isn't enough to make a dent in that thick metal skull of his, so Frank resorts to a more brutal approach. With Dr. Doom incapacitated, Frank takes a steel hammer off the castle walls and tells Doom not to worry, as the two of them have all the time in the world. From outside of the castle walls, loud clanging can be heard like a bell as Punisher wails down on Doom's face. Clang, 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 squish. At number 6 is Deadpool versus an entire Armageddon. In this wild and emotional Marvel storyline, Deadpool's dad mode kicked in hard. So Deadpool, the wild and wacky mercenary, found his daughter was in danger. He had been through heaps of chaos, and finally he had lost his chance at family bliss. But then, his daughter was alive and yet still under threat, so when the bad guys, the Ultimatum, tried to take her out, Deadpool just couldn't take it anymore. He knew so long as he was Deadpool, the trouble magnet, his family would never be safe, so he made a heartbreaking choice, luring all of Ultimatum, like the whole army, to a showdown. And he went absolutely berserk. He used tech from Tony Stark, blew up choppers, drove drones into the ground, and went on a rampage like no other, fighting for his daughter with everything he had, but in the end, it cost him his life. Deadpool went out in a blaze of glory protecting his family. At number 5 is Thor versus Iron Man. In the comics, you'll notice a certain God of Thunder was missing from the entire Civil War ordeal, and that's because at the time, Thor was deceased, but not for long, of course, because this is comic books we're talking about. Now, during this time, Iron Man was kind of a big shot running the show at S.H.I.E.L.D. and taking charge after winning the first Civil War. Captain America seemed out of the picture, and Stark even went out of his way to make a clone of Thor, which he used to lie to the world, saying Thor supported his cause. But then Thor came back, and he was not happy. Iron Man rolled in, thinking he could get Thor to join his team and follow the government's orders, but Thor was just not having it, especially with Iron Man acting all bossy and making clones of him and whatnot. So Thor shows him what's what. He thrashes Iron Man's super fancy suit, striking him multiple times with lightning and leaving him defenseless. Gripping Tony by the throat, Thor reminds Tony just who's the god and who's the puny mortal. Iron Man tries to smooth things over by offering Thor diplomatic immunity for Asgard. With his most powerful suit completely trashed, Tony ends up hitchhiking a ride back to town in the back of a pickup truck. At number 4, Spider-Man vs. Phoenix Colossus and Phoenix Magic. So the Phoenix Force is this super duper powerful energy which got split into 5 pieces by Iron Man's invention during the Avengers vs. X-Men brawl. These bits of the Phoenix Force energy latched onto some of the X-Men, giving them crazy amounts of power, like basically turning them into walking, talking hurricanes of strength. Among these supercharged X-Men were Colossus and Magic. both with their powers cranked up to 11. Colossus is this big tough dude whose skin is organic steel, basically making him a walking tank. Magik, on the other hand, can teleport and has some seriously magical mojo going on. These characters are obscenely powerful in their own right, let alone powered by a fifth of the Phoenix Force. Talk about OP. Now, Spider-Man gets stuck facing these two juggernauts who are basically gods at this point. To battle them in single-handed combat would spell his doom, but Spider-Man does it anyway. He won't back down for the sake of his friends, no matter how many times he gets hit. But man, these guys were just too much for him. They pounded him hard, cracking his bones and leaving him barely able to breathe, let alone stand. It was a complete beatdown, and it certainly was sickening. Every one of Colossus's 4 punches crushed Spider-Man's head to a pile of bloody pulp. His spine was completely shattered. But here's where it gets nuts. Spider-Man, even though he's all beaten up, nay, completely crushed, refuses to give in. He knows that he clearly can't outmuscle them, so he pulls a genius move, tricking Colossus and Magik into fighting each other, making them knock the Phoenix Force right out of themselves. So at the end of the day, Spider-Man emerges victorious, not because he's the strongest, but because he's the smartest and most stubborn hero around. And yeah, he is stubborn. He didn't have to do all this, but he did it to help the Avengers escape. So selfless. That's why we love Spider-Man. He gets beaten many times more than you can count, but he never gives up and always manages to win somehow. At number 3 is Punisher versus Wolverine. In a wild comic book series, Punisher and Wolverine tangled in a brutal showdown where Punisher, feeling cornered, went to extreme lengths to take down this unrelenting mutant. First up, he used a shotgun to blow off Wolverine's face, which is a huge deal. I mean, not so much because of Wolverine's crazy fast healing factor. Even with his face half gone, Logan was still standing, so the Punisher decided to go even further in the next issue, aiming low and wiping out Wolverine's gonads. Talk about hitting below the belt where it hurts, but then there's more! You see, the Punisher was desperate to buy time, and so he went full throttle. He didn't just stop at the face or the man parts, no. He rolled over Wolverine with a steamroller, squashing him flat like a pancake. Now, obviously, Logan still manages to survive, which is obviously some serious level toughness, but that did knock him out of the fight for a good while. Now this whole thing shows how insanely tough Wolverine is, surviving stuff that would put anybody else down for good. At number 2 is Spider-Man vs. Kingpin in Back in Black. The clash with the Kingpin illuminated a different facet of the web-slinger's character, notably during the Civil War arc in Marvel Comics. With Aunt May's life hanging in the balance due to Kingpin's orchestration, Peter found himself pushed beyond his usual moral thresholds. Striking a severe blow to the crime lord within the confines of a prison, Peter chose not to extinguish Kingpin's life. Instead, he dealt a far more nuanced form of retribution. In his relentless beating, Peter publicly stripped the Kingpin of his aura of invincibility and dominance. This action was more than just physical harm. It was an exhibition of psychological warfare too, revealing that the most impactful defeat can occur within the realms of perception and identity, rather than the purely physical. Though, I will say, it was physical. The message conveyed was super profound. By choosing not to end Kingpin's life, Spider-Man opted for a fate some might deem more excruciating: the knowledge of being bested in front of your peers, stripping away his veneer of invulnerability. And at number 1 is Magneto vs. Wolverine. Magneto vs. Wolverine in X-Men 25 was a brutal showdown. Magneto, with his insane magnetic powers, isn't exactly the ideal match for Wolverine. I mean, it's like pitting a Magikarp against a Jolteon. Like, come on, it's a one-sided massacre here. But Wolverine is tough as nails. He never backs down from a fight, even if it's not the smartest matchup. Now, this particular time, Magneto went all out, unleashing his full magnetic fury on Wolverine's adamantium-coated skeleton, basically ripping the near-indestructible adamantium right off of Wolverine's bones, tearing it through his flesh, leaving chunks of it sticking out from all over his body. That didn't kill Wolverine. His super healing factor kicked in, barely managing to get through the pain. But for fans, that was a gut punch. The adamantium was a huge part of Wolverine's identity, more than just his healing factor. It's what made him stand out, and for Magneto to just yank that away so casually was devastating. At number 10, the Thing is crushed by Dr. Doom's hand. The Ultimatum storyline from Marvel Comics kind of got a bad rep, mainly because it's super dark and had some seriously brutal moments. But one of the craziest scenes was when Dr. Doom, who's usually a big deal in the Marvel Universe, he got his face absolutely obliterated in the palm of the Thing's hand. So how did it go down? Well, Dr. Doom did something pretty awful that set off a huge catastrophe, leading leading to a slew of unalivings, including some of the Fantastic Four crew. Now, the Thing, who's not usually the trigger-happy type, got seriously ticked off by all this. And so what does he do? He grabs Dr. Doom's head in his palm and squishes it like a stress ball. That's not really your average superhero move, but when you think about all the damage that Doom caused, you kind of get why the Thing lost it. I mean, it's a shocking moment in comic book history. The Thing usually doesn't go around squishing heads, but this time he definitely did. Ultimatum may not be everyone's cup of tea, but this definitely left a mark with that hardcore Thing moment. At number 9, Manuki gets roasted. The Punisher, in his quest against crime boss Ma-Nuki, went to extreme lengths. Ma-Nuki, who was determined and relentless, despite losing all her limbs to a polar bear, met a brutal end. You see, after the Punisher took down her criminal network, he confronted her in a fiery showdown, to say the least. And so, in a final clash, Ma-Nuki lunged at the Punisher without any limbs. It's pretty interesting to see. But Frank Castle didn't hold back, pushing her back into a raging fire. Now, the details of her fate weren't shown, but I mean, burning alive is a horrific way to go. The intense heat and flames would have caused some excruciating pain, making her last moments unimaginably agonizing. This villain's defeat stands out for its raw brutality, showcasing the Punisher's uncompromising stance against those he deems as threats to justice. The scene, although not super graphically depicted, leaves a super haunting impression of the price paid in battle against crime. If you're enjoying this video so far, please support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. Coming in at number 8, Taskmaster and Hyperion obliterate each other. Okay, so Taskmaster is like a human sponge. I mean, not in the way you would think, but I mean, in both ways in this case. You see, he can soak up fighting moves just by watching them, which is what makes him super dangerous in the Marvel world. But he's not somebody with magical powers like Thor. He's just got something even scarier: the willingness to do whatever it takes to win. In a recent showdown, Taskmaster faced off against Hyperion, who's basically one of Marvel's versions of Superman, which sounds like an impossible feat. Am I right? I mean, Hyperion is super tough, I mean, basically indestructible. But guess what? Taskmaster found a way to beat him, and he did so by getting his own ass beat really hard. You see, at first, Taskmaster was getting absolutely crushed. Bones were breaking, organs were being bruised, bodily fluids spattered all over the place. It was a total mess. It seems every trick in Taskmaster's book was just shrugged off by Hyperion. But ultimately, taking this beating paid off for Taskmaster, as Hyperion completely underestimated him when he ignored an arrow that, to his credit, it missed him by a mile. But as it turns out, that arrow was tipped with Argonite radiation, basically Hyperion's kryptonite, and the arrow actually turned back around like a boomerang and struck the unsuspecting Super Blonde right in the back. When Hyperion got hit, he screamed in pain, fell down, and here's the scary part. Hyperion was basically done for, like the mission was complete, and all Taskmaster had to do was walk away. But he didn't walk away. He went full-on savage, beating the guts out of the depowered Hyperion, ready to take him out completely. And if it weren't for Nick Cage yelling through his intercom, he totally would have done it too. It took Nick Cage reminding Taskmaster that he's supposed to be professional and not end this guy in cold blood. That's how ruthless Taskmaster could be though. I mean, he's beaten big shots before, but taking down Hyperion, even if it almost killed him, shows just how deadly this guy truly is. Heroes better not take him lightly or they might just end up regretting it big time.
Okay, maybe a bit of a controversial pick here, but Superman Returns has made the list. The movie, I'm talking about the movie. Basically, Lex Luthor has used kryptonite to grow a massive landmass out in the ocean, which leaves Superman completely vulnerable. He lands on the new island and it's bad news from the get-go. Lex and his goons have already gotten in position on this kind of Krypton-like island, but underneath, embedded into the rocks, is pure kryptonite. Tons of it. So it makes it incredibly easy for Lex Luthor to push Superman down these rocky stairs and then kick him while he's down, literally and figuratively. And then his goons start giving Superman this beating that actually kind of feels pretty scary and real, and I was like not expecting that at all. I don't think I've ever seen Superman so unable to do anything, and then Lex has like this sharp piece of kryptonite that he breaks off in this gasping for air Superman, who then falls off of a cliff. Moving on, John Walker, aka US Agent, is not the most loved character out there, but while he is a bit of like an anti-hero, he's still a hero from time to time. For example, when he answers the call to fight against Norman Osborn and his goons during the events of Siege. In The Mighty Avengers number 36, he attempts to stop the Thunderbolts from stealing Odin's spear. Unfortunately, another USA affiliated bad guy who is slightly crazy is also on the field today, and his name is Nuke, and he is pretty ruthless. Nuke is able to use the spear against US Agent, slicing off both his left arm and left leg. US Agent would go on to be wheelchair bound, refusing any enhanced cybernetics, and somehow he was still actually pretty capable. Moving on to the third spot today, Atlas is a character for DC Comics created by Jack Kirby, joining the comics in the 70s. He was always intended as a kind of anti-hero, and he has more or less played out that way since. But in 2010, Atlas was brainwashed by an unknown villain to attack the Justice League, and he is one of the few characters to absolutely pummel the tar out of Superman. Sure, Superman could be slightly holding back against this fellow hero, but I've always kinda hated that argument because then it makes me think that Superman is just faking it when he gets absolutely rocked, and I feel like that's not the case here. Atlas is taking Superman to the cleaners. They're going hit for hit, but Superman, even with help, he just can't take it, and Atlas eventually knocks him down to the concrete. Now, coming up second to last today, following the events of Original Sin, where Thor becomes unworthy to wield Mjolnir, Odin's son attempts to continue his superhero career in Thor number 1. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't really turn out too well for him when the axe Jarnbjorn proves to be a pretty poor substitute for his mighty hammer. In battle with Malekith the Accursed and the Frost Giants, Thor has his arm severed off with his own axe, and he's left to perish at the bottom of the ocean. The new female Thor, who's actually Jane Foster, becomes the wielder of Mjolnir, and it is up to her to defeat Malekith. The original Thor does return with a new metal arm made out of black Uru, and initially he wants his hammer back, but then he sees Jane Foster handling it pretty well, and he just decides to drop the Thor title completely and just goes by Odin's son instead. The man was crushed. And finally, in the infamous A Death in the Family story, DC not only slew a Robin, but they did it in the most disturbing way they could have. Jason Todd had disobeyed direct orders from Bruce Wayne to not go near the Joker. The problem was that Jason had just met his birth mother for the first time, who it turned out was a criminal working for the Joker. Also, he's Jason Todd, so he just didn't listen. He went to the warehouse where the Joker and his goons were at with the intention of saving his mom. But in a heartbreaking turn of events, his own mom betrayed him to the Joker to save herself, which of course doesn't actually save her at all. And the Joker leaves her to pass away with Jason anyways. Joker is shown repeatedly beating the snot out of Jason Todd with a crowbar. It's harrowing. Joker leaves him suffering on the brink with an explosive device, and the hero manages to push through his injuries to get to the door with the help of his mom, only to find out that the Joker had locked them both inside. Coming in at number 10, Superman Revenge Squad. After discovering the home planet of the Superman Revenge Squad, which this time is a confederation of criminals and tyrants from across the galaxy, as opposed to the team of supervillains from later comics, Superman wastes no time at all and charges at the planet with a full frontal assault, armed with nothing but his abilities and a strange package attached to his chest. Now, the Revenge Squad fires all their most dangerous, most powerful ordnance at Superman, firing everything they think will take out the Man of Steel. They all impact on Kal-El, and the villains think that they've won. For a moment. But when the dust settled, they didn't even leave a scratch on Superman. Instead, the package on Soup's chest detonates, encircling the whole planet in a layer of mist. Now this seems really strange, but luckily, Superman is around to give us some exposition. Superman yells down to the entire planet of villains, explaining if any of them pass through the mist, leaving the planet, they will suffer total amnesia, forgetting any hatred that they have for Superman. So, they have the choice to remain trapped on their base, being angry and upset, or they can rejoin the cosmos devoid of all grudges. Either way, Superman doubts he will ever see them again, and then he just flies back home. This is brutal, but in a wholly different way. Coming in at number 9 today is Simon. Simon Jones is a villain of the Teen Titans who has vast telekinesis and telepathic powers, and he is also a leader of the Fearsome Five. All of that, but he basically just calls himself Simon, but cool because there's a silent P in front of it, so we all know that he has psychic powers. Very cool. In Salvation Run number 2, Simon is among the new Injustice League when a bunch of villains, including him, get exiled to an alien world. Now Simon, who is standing among some pretty big name villains, attempts to convince his fellow supervillains that escape is impossible. So then he proceeds to lay down his own plans for beginning a new civilization involving all the female villains getting pregnant and giving birth as soon and as frequently as possible. But the Joker is also here, and he doesn't seem to be a fan of Simon. Joker very abruptly interrupts Simon, tossing a rock that hits the guy square in the noggin, and then he runs up and smashes Simon over the head repeatedly with another rock, and then assumes control. Number 8. Billy Kincaid. Billy Kincaid was first introduced in issue number 5 of the Spawn comic book series, and he's an incredibly deranged and disgusting person. Originally sentenced to 22 years in prison for taking the life of someone much too young, his good behavior coupled with his attorney and a ridiculous positive psychiatric evaluation saw Kincaid gain early parole after only 6 years. Now before his passing and return as Spawn, Al Simmons had been hired as an assassin to take out Kincaid. However, he arrived just as the cops had caught this man. Al learned that Kincaid's real victim count is all the way up at 27 people, but with no solid evidence and someone covering Kincaid's tracks, he was never caught for those crimes. Now, 6 years later and out of prison, Billy Kincaid went right back to his old habits, picking up his occupation as Mr. Chili, the most terrifying ice cream man you have ever seen, and he ends up taking the life of another innocent soul. Spawn, finding out Kincaid has been freed, is able to track Kincaid down, and the next time we see Billy, he is chained up in Detective Sam Burke's office, impaled with popsicle sticks and an ice cream scoop with a popsicle shoved in his mouth, and a note, Spawn apparently attached to his body, which reads, "Boys screamed and girls screamed, so I made him scream, and scream, and scream." And that is both terrifying and good riddance, man.
At number 7, the Joker caves Simon's skull in. You know that unpredictable maniacal clown who's always keeping everybody on their toes? Well, he's known for some pretty wild antics, but this one really took the cake in terms of sheer brutality. So Simon, this telekinetic and telepathic baddie from the Teen Titans series, was causing his usual chaos. But then, in Salvation Run number 2, things took a really dark and gruesome turn, as the Joker, in his usual twisted manner, decided to put an end to Simon, and let's just say it was not a peaceful resolution. See, the Joker went full-on ruthless, grabbing a rock and violently caving in Simon's skull. Yeah, you heard that right. It was seriously graphic and intense, even by Joker standards. This is coming from a guy who's literally skinned people alive before. The moment wasn't just shocking because it was the Joker, it was just the sheer level of brutality that left readers stunned. This is one of those jaw-dropping scenes that really makes you grasp how twisted and unpredictable the Joker can truly be when he's pushed to the edge. At number 6, Wolverine dismembers a Sabretooth clone. You're not gonna believe the crazy battles that went down in this one. Picture this. So Wolverine, the tough-as-nails mutant with those claws, is facing off against a clone of Sabretooth, villain known for being downright ruthless. This clone was no joke. It went on a full-on rampage and actually took out Feral, one of Wolverine's crew. So now that Wolverine was armed with the Murasama Blade, which is basically a superhero's dream weapon for taking down the unkillable, Wolverine stepped up, and let me tell you, he did not hold back. With one swift move, he sliced off the clone's arm, and then, like a lightning bolt, he went for the head and chopped it clean off. But here's the thing, see, Wolverine wasn't about to take any chances. Even though Sabretooth was taken out with the Murasama Blade, which basically renders him unable to regenerate, Logan still made sure to bury every single piece of that clone separately. Some next level caution right there. But just when he thought he'd finished off Sabretooth, the original popped back up, which was a surprise twist in the story. Wolverine must have been scratching his head thinking that he put the villain down for good, but nah, these comic book folks always find a way to bounce back. At number 5 was the comic book moment where Wonder Woman took down Maxwell Lord. This one is intense and brutal. So here's how it went down. Superman, under mind control, goes berserk, thinking his loved ones are in danger, but as it turns out, Maxwell Lord is pulling the strings. Wonder Woman steps up and wrangles Lord in her lasso of truth. Now here's the kicker. Lord spills the beans that the only way to free Superman's mind is to off him. And that's when Wonder Woman, with no time dilly-dallying, does the unthinkable. snapping Lord's neck. Pretty heavy stuff. No flashy speeches or grandstanding, just a swift execution with serious consequences. This scene caused quite a stir in the comic world for its shock value and for Wonder Woman's quite uncharacteristic move. It's one of those moments that makes you stop and think about the lengths that heroes might go to when backed up against the wall. And number 4, Sentry rips Carnage in half. So Carnage is one of the baddest of the bad guys in the Marvel Universe, causing all kinds of chaos in his Supermax prison. The guy was all set to go on a rampage, targeting Spider-Woman, Luke Cage, Spider-Man, Daredevil, Captain America, the whole lot. Now that's an all-star team of superheroes, but then things get really messy when in swoops the Sentry. Now the Sentry is no ordinary hero. He's got crazy powers, like next level stuff. Basically, yet another one of Marvel's Superman equivalents. So what does he do? He doesn't waste any time with punches or speeches, none of that. He just grabs Carnage, flies them both up into space, into the great atmosphere up there, and then, once he's up there, when it's just him, Carnage, and the stars, Sentry does the unthinkable. Just tears Carnage apart, quite literally, like a scene out of a sci-fi horror flick. You see, Carnage has a symbiote suit which gives him insane powers, making him almost unkillable, but when you're up against the power of a guy like the Sentry, someone who's got the strength of a zillion suns, well, let's just say it's game over for Carnage. The symbiote couldn't handle that kind of cosmic level power, and just like that, one of the nastiest villains ever meant a seriously brutal end. At number 3 is Daniel West getting nuked. Reverse Flash, aka Daniel West, wasn't your regular bad guy. He had his super speed going on just like the Flash, but he used his powers for all the wrong reasons. I mean, imagine going up against your own grandpa. That's some next level family drama right there. Now the Suicide Squad, known for recruiting not so good guys for their missions, thought it would be good to try to turn him into a hero, but alas, their plan didn't exactly pan out. So here comes the big showdown. There's this bomb planted by the League of Assassins set to destroy a whole city. And here's when Reverse Flash steps in, thinking that he can be the hero this time. He swoops in, saves the day by getting rid of the bomb, but then tragedy strikes as the thing blows up when he's holding it, and he's caught in the blast, ending his villainous run right then and there in the middle of the ocean. At number 2, the Void gets ripped in half by Null. Alright, now it's the Sentry's turn to get ripped in half. Lots of ripping in half in this one. Alright, so the Sentry, a hero with a split personality, kind of like Jekyll and Hyde, but with superpowers. On one side, he's the good old hero, the Sentry, and on the other, he's the Void, a real cosmic level problem when the story calls for it. Now, things got really wild when these two sides joined forces and became a serious problem, but enter Null, the big shot symbiote god. Null and the Sentry had a clash where Null managed to pull off something straight out of an ironic playbook as he actually ripped the Void himself in half. This wasn't the first time Void would bite the dust like this, but it seems like this time it actually stuck. What's interesting here is how the Sentry, who was once a huge multiversal threat and later became a super strong Avenger, but this defeat by Null is the kind of comic book stuff that sticks around. It's like Null was like, oh, you're into tearing things in half? How about I show you how it's done? At number 1 is Reverse Flash evaporated by Dr. Manhattan. Eobard Thawne, aka Reversed Flash from the DC Universe, is no stranger to biting the dust, having died and being resurrected more times than anybody can count. At this point, it's just been chopped up to his time-traveling antics, rendering him a living paradox. But his demise in the Button storyline takes the cake. Picture this. He shows up in Batman's cave, zapped by a blue light while holding his, weird Watchmen button from the comics, and then he vanishes. Seconds later, he reappears, no button, and collapses. His body starts vaporizing on the spot, leaving only a skeleton, muttering about seeing God before biting the big one. Now the thing is, Reverse Flash thought he hit the jackpot by touching that button, hoping for some power or connection, but as it turns out, it was linked to Dr. Manhattan, the big shot from the Watchmen, who zapped him into a crisp in an attempt to remain undiscovered within the DC Universe. The whole ordeal with the button bridged the Watchmen world and the DC Universe together, and poor Eobard over here became a crispy critter in the cosmic crossover. Pretty brutal.
Number 10, 3 Jokers. Thanks to Batman's time on the Mobius chair during DC's Darkseid War event, Bruce discovered that there are apparently 3 Jokers running around Gotham City. This led to the 3 Jokers story from 2020. 3 crimes were committed on the same night, seemingly all by the Joker. Alongside the Bat family, Batman discovers that these crimes were committed by the 3 different Jokers that he learned about. The original Golden Age Joker, known as the Criminal, the Killing Joke Joker, known as the Clown, and the Silver Age Joker, known as the Comedian. Jason Todd, Barbara Gordon, and Batman himself all team up to go after each Joker one at a time, and as you might expect, it doesn't nearly go that smoothly. This is one of the best Joker stories in recent years. It almost feels like it stands alone outside of any kind of continuity, and that's because as it kind of really does. It's incredibly good and surprising and keeps you on your toes, and the revelation of 3 different Jokers was something a lot of people just never expected. But what I think is even better than the 3 Jokers is the chaotic feeling of not knowing if there were actually 3 or if there is a definitive Joker. Until the end of the story. Number 9. Infamous Iron Man. Of all the things to happen to the character of Dr. Doom, becoming the new Iron Man was not at all what I expected. After the events of Secret Wars and reality being brought back to normal, Victor Von Doom was kinda just unsatisfied with his life. He decided to switch his morality and try to serve and help others instead of being a power-seeking villain. Doom took on a bit of a mentor in Tony Stark, whom he'd always actually respected, but when Tony Stark was put into a coma, Doom decided to take his place as the infamous Iron Man, which was a great reason to give us a Dr. Doom in a highly advanced suit of Iron Man's Model Prime Mark 51 armor. The armor was retrofitted into Doom's style, going from the red and gold to the gray, green, and light blue of Dr. Doom, and it's probably my favorite look ever for an Iron Man armor, period. But alongside the capabilities of the Iron Man armor, Doom was still able to access his magical abilities. To make things even better, Doom's intellect and sorcery were near their peaks during this period in time, so he is truly an incredibly powerful hero. One of the ways Doom went about saving the world was using his knowledge of the criminal underworld from when he was a criminal to arrest a large gathering of villains in one big move. These villains were all gathered to figure out what they were going to do now that Dr. Doom has switched sides, and then Doom just busts through the roof and takes down heavy hitters like the Wizard, the Wrecking Crew, and the Hood and Jigsaw all in one go. It's awesome. Number 8. Dark Knight. Batman The Dark Knight Returns came to us originally as a way to give Batman/Bruce Wayne a fitting end, and it's easily one of the greatest Batman stories out there, with Frank Miller art that was actually understandable and a great tale that wrapped up the character of Batman in a lovely bow. But then Frank Miller went and created 2 sequels, and the first of which is basically a fever dream of insanity, overly objectified blocky cartoon women, and just really odd visuals, while also taking the character of Superman and completely misunderstanding and disrespecting him. But I think the most egregious moment came when Superman and the third member of the Trinity, Wonder Woman, decided that they were going to hook up, right after Batman beat the absolute snot out of the Man of Steel. Wonder Woman comes in to find Superman completely beaten and ranting about how it's all over, and then, after punching him for being weak, I guess, they immediately just start making out, and then they fly up into the stratosphere and begin going at it mid-air. Then they slam into the ground, causing volcanic eruptions and earthquakes and tsunamis and hurricane-level winds, all for Wonder Woman to say that Superman had moved the Earth for her. Wow, so cute. So poetic. And then she exclaims that she is now pregnant, and they decide to go and get a bite to eat. It's really weird. It's really weird. Number 7. Mr. Mxyzptlk. The villain known as Mr. Mxyzptlk is both incredibly powerful, but he also doesn't really do anything that bad. He's usually just a big old nuisance for Superman. In Superman Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, though, a whole bunch of Superman's villains all make their play on the Man of Steel at the same time. And when their threat is obviously ended by Superman, he is still left wondering why these villains all came together and who organized them. It's then that he realizes the only villain that wasn't amongst them was the 5th dimensional imp, Mr. Mxyzptlk. Mr. Mxyzptlk reveals himself and then goes on and on about how, being immortal, he gets really bored. Because of that, he spent the first 2,000 years just floating around doing nothing, then 2,000 years doing good deeds and being nice to people, and then he spent about 2 years being a mischievous little imp, and now he's deciding to go and start being evil. And his first evil act to kick off the next 2 millennia will be taking out Superman himself. Now Mr. Mix reveals his horrendous true form and goes on to attack Superman. But Superman grabbed the Phantom Zone projector, and as he used it on the villain, Mr. Mix simultaneously spoke his name backwards to try and escape back to the 5th dimension. With both of those things happening at the same time, Mxyzptlk was very literally torn in half completely between both the Phantom Zone and the 5th dimension. And apparently, Superman did this completely on purpose before he went to go sulk about it. Number 6. Dinosaurus. The Viltrumites from the Invincible comic series are a race of near invulnerable, incredibly strong, world-conquering aliens, but none among them stands as strong, as invulnerable as Grand Regent Thrag. Battle hardened over thousands of years, only the most powerful characters can even hope to stand one-on-one against this powerhouse. And David Anders, the villain known as Dinosaurus, is not one of those guys. While Dinosaurus is very, very strong, it's more so his intelligence that is his greatest weapon. Dinosaurus allied himself with Invincible around issue number 90 of the comic, and in an attempt on Mark's life by Thrag, Dinosaurus comes to Invincible's aid, which he had to know would not go well. Dinosaurus attacks Thrag, but his claws shatter like glass on Thrag's invulnerable skin. Thrag then proceeds to pummel Mr. Anders, only stopping when he was distracted by an explosion. This brief moment of pause gave Dinosaurus the chance to chomp down on the Grand Regent's head. Fortunately though, just like his claws, Dino's teeth also completely shatter, not even leaving a scratch on Thrag, which gives Thrag the chance to first mock the guy, but then break his jaw and leave him to think about his mistake. Number 5, Blockbuster. Blockbuster may be a relatively unknown villain to some, and that may be due to the fact that he was primarily a Nightwing villain operating in Bloodhaven, and he mainly only ever showed up in Nightwing's own series, which is actually really good, if not extremely underrated. In a tragic series of events, Blockbuster's mother passed away, and Blockbuster blamed this on Nightwing. He set out on a campaign to ruin the hero's life, attempting to take away anything and anyone that mattered to Dick Grayson instead of trying to hurt Nightwing physically himself. When Nightwing was at his absolute lowest in Nightwing number 93 from 2004, after a slog of a fight that moved out onto a fire escape, Nightwing had Blockbuster on the ropes when the new vigilante and Nightwing's sort of not really girlfriend, Tarantula, showed up ready to bring Blockbuster to an end. In a move I and a lot of people just did not see coming, Nightwing leaves his morals at the door, realizing Blockbuster will never stop, and he steps aside to allow Tarantula to actually end the villain's life. Number 4, Lex Luthor. There have been a few times where Superman loses his powers. The one I want to talk about here is from All-Star Superman Volume 1, number 12. Clark Kent had lost his powers, and thanks to a serum, Lex Luthor had gained those powers. Now, after Lex makes threats against the Daily Planet staff, Clark shoots Lex with a gravity gun. While it made him fall from the sky, Lex doesn't realize the gravity gun is quickly draining his powers as well, and eventually it gives him supersensory input after he had defeated a weakened Superman in combat in front of the media. Once his powers drain away though, Lex goes to attack Superman in a fit of anger, and the recently beaten up depowered Superman is still no pushover as he takes out Lex with 2 non-superpowered punches to the face. This was in front of all the media Lex had just declared his dominion of Earth in front of 2. Then, Superman literally saves the entire solar system. Very cool. Number 3, Doctor Doom. Marvel's Ultimate Universe is a mixed bag. We got a lot of really cool moments and fun stories and alternate looks at heroes that we love. Ultimate Spider-Man is one of the best Spider-Man runs of all time, but the Ultimate Universe also gave us some duds, some really weird questionable choices, and it gave us Ultimatum. There are tons of things we could talk about when it comes to brutal moments in this book, for heroes and villains alike. I've talked about the Ant-Man, Wasp, and Blob moment to death, and it still makes me cringe and gag. But another less talked about, extremely uncharacteristically brutal defeat from Ultimatum would be when the Thing ended the life of Doctor Doom. Doctor Doom had been the one to take the life of the Scarlet Witch, sending Magneto over the edge and starting Ultimatum in the first place. Doom indirectly caused a massive loss of life, including some members of the Fantastic Four. So, in revenge, Ben Grimm the Thing took a little trip to Latveria. He walks in Doom's front door, tanks a blast from Doom, scolds him a very tiny bit, and then he grabs his head in one rocky hand and crushes it like a can of crushed tomatoes, right in front of a captured Namor who can only watch on in horror. In at number 2 today, it's the Green Goblin. Now, look, the Green Goblin kind of deserves his brutal defeat, unless you look at Green Goblin as a sick man who really just needs some serious rehabilitation. That's also valid. But after the removal of Gwen Stacy's soul from our earthly plane, Spider-Man was unsurprisingly not happy, and he wanted revenge. In response, Gobby wanted to put Spider-Man 6 feet under. When the two fought in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 122, the fight was intense, with Goblin even insulting the value of Gwen Stacy's life. Peter naturally lost it and begins to pummel the Goblin. Now Peter comes to his senses, stopping himself from taking the Goblin's life and becoming no better than the Goblin himself. But Norman wasn't done with Spider-Man just yet. Using his remote-controlled glider, he attempts to fly it and its big pointy blades right into Spider-Man's back. But Spider-Man has his spider sense, and it saves him at the very last moment when he dodges the glider that flies straight into the Green Goblin's chest, ending him very suddenly. Now, Norman does recover from this wound and returns years later, but at that time, it was thought to be his true passing, and the worst part is that it didn't make Peter feel any better. Goblin's accidental passing didn't mean anything. It didn't make up for Gwen's own passing, and it just left Peter feeling hollow and empty. And finally, in at number 1 today, it's the Governor. For this point, I think I'm gonna do something rather unexpected and turn to Image Comics' The Walking Dead. There are so many good villains in this comic book series, and there are also way too many brutal moments. Sometimes the two clash and give us a very cathartic, if not utterly harrowing defeat of a villain. And in this case, his name is the Governor. Leading his own community called Woodbury, at first the Governor seems like a decent dude for about 5 minutes before he threatens to feed Rick, Glenn, and Michonne to the zombies. And then he cuts off Rick's hand. He ends up keeping the 3 captive and treats Michonne the worst of the bunch. When she finally escapes, she comes back for some serious revenge. Knocking the Governor unconscious, Michonne strips him to his skivvies, makes holes in his shoulders, does unspeakable things to his nether regions, places a spoon where the sun don't shine. She removes his left eye and his fingernails and frees him of his left arm. Now somehow, the Governor survives this, leading to an incredibly savage attack on the prison where our group of survivors are staying. During this attack, the Governor's own people turn on him for his ways, and that's the end of one of the first real human villains in the Walking Dead series.
Number 10, Superman vs. Batman. This fight doesn't even come from the main continuity, hailing instead from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns continuity of Earth 31. But it was so brutal that it was still incorporated into the main continuity of the DCEU at the time. Batman at this point in his story in this alternate world in the comics is not only still without superpowers, but he was also retired. When he decides to return from retirement, Superman is tasked with taking him out, ordered to do so by the president. But Batman isn't prepared to go down without a fight, and a bloody, brutal, and desperate battle ensues between these two heroes. At the end of the story, we later find out Batman seemingly won in his own smart way, typical Batman. While Batman seemingly dies during the fight, we later learn at the funeral that he is still alive and well, and that Clark may have even been in on this plan the whole time. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and if you love it when we talk about brutal fights, be sure to check out our brutal playlist for even more content like this. Number 9, Batman vs. Green Lantern. For this point, we're not talking about Hal Jordan, but instead everyone's favorite Lantern, well, some people's favorite Lantern anyways, Guy Gardner. Guy Gardner is a Green Lantern who's been known to get on his teammates' nerves. At times, his cockiness is just too much for his fellow heroes, which seems to be the case here for Batman, who in his frustration referred to Gardner as a mongrel. Guy does not take kindly to this insult, and with tensions already having been built prior, he challenges Batman to a fight he is sure to lose considering he decides to remove his lantern ring to even the playing field. Batman accepts his challenge and knocks him out in one punch. Number 8, Bane vs. Batman. Probably one of the most famous fights in comic book history. In this fight, Batman is brutalized by Bane. Bane ends up escaping Arkham and decides to see how much havoc he can cause. When Batman ends up overwhelmed by the hordes of recently escaped criminals swarming the streets of Gotham, Bane takes this as an opportunity to strike. Run down and exhausted after 3 months of non-stop fighting with barely any time to rest, Batman is easily defeated by the villain, who famously breaks Batman's back over his knee. Though really the most impressive and brutal feat was honestly getting Batman to such a fragile point, which is not easy to do. Batman would recover from this and ultimately return, but it would take him quite some time to heal. In the interim, he'd be forced to call on someone to replace him, ultimately choosing Jean-Paul Valley's Azrael.
Number 7, Sins Past. Look, I hate talking about this as much as you hate hearing about it, but Marvel did it, and I don't think we should forget that. The passing of Gwen Stacy at the hands of the Green Goblin is one of the defining moments in Peter Parker's life, and it cemented Green Goblin as one of Peter's most ruthless foes. Then, Marvel and J. Michael Straczynski gave us the Sins Past Spider-Man story arc, and specifically, Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, number 512. 2 twin assassins show up in New York on the trail of the Whipslinger, and to cut to the chase, the These twins were actually the secret children of Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn from when they had an affair, and their birth was suddenly revealed as the whole reason that Norman even took out Gwen in the first place. But the question is, how are these twins around the same age as Peter? Apparently, it's because of Norman's enhanced blood, which caused them to age quicker than normal. Basically, Marvel decided that ruining the image of Gwen Stacy and slightly devaluing her passing was worth it to create an extremely overcomplicated arc that goes nowhere and adds nothing but ickiness to the Spider-Man continuity, and then it got retconned. Number 6. Marriage. The wedding of Batman and Catwoman was a big deal. It was teased at and built up for a long time. Fans were genuinely excited to see it happen and to see what would come next after the fact. A kid of Selina Kyle and Bruce Wayne would be awesome. At least it would be awesome, but sadly, the wedding that was so coveted never came to be. Batman issue 50 came and went, and following suit, so did Catwoman. She came and went from Bruce, literally leaving the groom at the altar. Batman was marrying Catwoman so he could actually be happy. And after some convincing words from criminals like the Joker and her friend Holly, Catwoman believed that if Bruce Wayne was happy, then Batman couldn't be Batman. Which, one, that's just depressing, but two, both the Joker and Holly, alongside Riddler, Gotham Girl, Flashpoint, Thomas Wayne Batman, and other villains, were actually working for Bane, who was manipulating events in order to break Batman emotionally and give rise to the City of Bane event. It certainly sent Batman down a path of absolute despair. He became much more drastic with his fighting of criminals, particularly an innocent Mr. Freeze, and he even donned a less advanced version of his Batsuit that he would just take more of a beating. It's just sad. Number 5. Spider-Man's black suit. Spider-Man's red and blue classic suit is extremely iconic, and I don't think anyone thinks that it's bad. The Sam Raimi version of that suit is beautiful, but the black spider suit that appeared in Secret Wars? Whew, that suit was something else. If you tell me that you don't like this one, you are a liar, and 2, we cannot be friends. This suit was actually designed by a guy called Randy Schuler for a contest that Marvel had, and they paid him $220 for it. $220 for one of the most fan-beloved Spider-Man suits of all time. $220 for what would eventually become one of Spider-Man's greatest villains and eventually one of Marvel's most popular anti-heroes, Venom. It's the best investment that they ever made. The black symbiote suit was so great and so popular that Marvel even came up with excuses for Peter to get a regular cloth version of the suit made by his girlfriend, Black Cat. That was not a brain-consuming symbiote and just had the benefit of stealth, intimidation, and looking sexy. And at number 4 today is Bialia. Black Adam does not give a damn. The only things he has shown to care about are himself, his family, and his country. He has ripped someone in half as a warning to not mess with Kahndaq, which is his country. He has obliterated Psycho Pirate's face for manipulating his own mind, and he took on almost the entire superhuman community in the World War III event. But the whole catalyst for that last one was because he completely decimated the entire innocent population of the country of Bialia. The science squad of Oolong Island, it's a weird name, I know, created the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse for the express purpose of wiping out the Black Marvel family. Now, after the passing of Isis and Osiris, Black Adam's direct family, he hunted the 4 Horsemen of Apocalypse to take revenge. This brought him to the country of Bialia. Now, when he couldn't find the Horsemen, his rage and frustration got the better of him, and he essentially attacked the whole frickin' country. Adam's rampage ended countless innocent people's existences. It was easily his most terrible act, as they had done absolutely nothing wrong, and he was just blinded by cold, hard rage. Number 3. Mar-Vell. Mar-Vell of the Kree was Marvel Comics' original Captain Marvel, and he was also the first Marvel superhero to permanently pass away when he succumbed to cancer in 1982's The Death of Captain Marvel. That was a huge moment in comic book lore, and he remains to be one of the only heroes to have passed away and not get resurrected. The character has reappeared as visions or in flashbacks and obviously in alternate realities, but he never came back really. One of the coolest and most unexpected ways he did reappear, however, was in the alternate universe which became known as the Cancerverse. It's just a really cool and creative idea. Basically, on his infamous deathbed, the Many-Angled Ones contact and corrupt the dying Mar-Vell, granting him new powers which he used to transmute the other heroes, and with Mar-Vell as their lord, they completely took down the Avatar of Death, which in turn completely destroyed Death itself, stopping people from ever actually passing away. This, in turn, allowed the Many-Angled Ones to invade this reality, and it became a nightmare. Number 2. Invincible Ultimatum. David Anders, aka Dinosaurus, appearing in the Invincible comic book series, is an interesting villain. While he does incredibly evil things, he is genuinely trying to save the world and the human race from climate change and the fact that we are destroying our own planet and resources. Following in the logic of the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few, he has done some truly awful things, like destroying the entirety of Las Vegas. But still, Invincible saw the good in this villain, somehow, and he decided to team up with him anyways. Unfortunately, that was a mistake. From Invincible issue 98 to 100, we got an event called The Death of Everyone. Mark had been affected by the Scourge virus and had temporarily lost his powers. Because of this, Dinosaurus took things into his own hands, distracting Invincible and the other heroes with devices in Los Angeles that caused earthquakes. Meanwhile, his real plan was to detonate devices all over Greenland, melting ice and leading to a massive rise in sea level, wiping out thousands of people living in the world's coastal cities. This leads to a massive fight between Mark and Dinosaurus, during the climax of which Dino completely ends Mark by squishing his head till it pops. Now it turns out the person who Dinosaurus squished and ripped apart was actually a very convincing clone that he swapped out for Invincible mid-fight to make the world think that Mark was hard deleted from life. And finally, in at number 1 today is Marvel vs. DC. Marvel Comics and DC Comics have for a long time been the two biggest comic book companies that we have, but the 90s were a rough time for comics. To help fight abysmal sales, the two companies staged a crossover. When two entities known as the Brothers, the embodiments of both the Marvel and DC multiverses, remembered each other's existence due to some multiversal and reality-based tomfoolery, they pitted combatants from their respective realities together to decide who was better and who should be destroyed. This gave us the 1996 series called simply DC vs. Marvel. Heroes and villains across both universes ended up facing off. Storm faced off against Wonder Woman, Superman fought the Hulk, and for whatever reason, Robin faced off against the X-Men Jubilee. I don't know. DC vs. Marvel was shameless fan service, and no one cared because it was awesome. Sure, it wasn't particularly that well written or drawn, but whatever. As a solution to the conflict, the Living Tribunal from Marvel and the Spectre from DC joined forces and combined the two universes together, creating the Amalgam Universe. A universe that had its own unique history and was a combination of both DC and Marvel with mashed together characters like Darkclaw. A crossover like this hadn't happened before, and it probably won't ever happen again, but I for one am just glad that it happened at all.
Number 10. Punisher vs. a Criminal. This is going to be an interesting one to try and describe. This devastating beatdown comes from Punisher Max issue number 28. If you don't know Punisher Max and you like brutal moments and storytelling, this might be a series for you to check out. In issue number 28 of the series, before he gets to the head of a criminal operation that he's in the process of stopping, Frank deals with the son of the operation's head, Christu, attempting to get information from him on his father, Tiberiu, and their associate, Vera. He attempts to get him to talk by seemingly numbing him and then using his organs as basically decor for a tree. We don't know of Christu's fate, but I can't imagine it ended well for him, knowing how Frank usually deals with criminals. Although he did promise that if Christu gave him the information he was looking for, he'd actually be okay, and Frank would use his medic training and knowledge to save his life. Though I personally wouldn't trust that knowledge myself if it was Frank Castle and he did that to me.
Next on the list is the Hulk versus the Sentry. Okay, this is one of the craziest throwdowns in Marvel history. This one takes place in World War Hulk number 5. So picture this, the Hulk, fueled by rage, obviously, returns to Earth ready to serve some serious payback to those who banished him from the planet. On the flip side, we've got the Sentry, this hero who's holding back because he's terrified of the enormous power he wields. Basically like the Marvel equivalent of Superman here. When these two finally face off, it was like fireworks fireworks on the 4th of July. Explosions, chaos, destruction everywhere. The Century unleashed his powers, sending the Hulk flying through buildings like they were made of cardboard. But you know the Hulk, he's tough as nails, so he took these hits and dished them right back like a titanic game of ping pong. Now what's mind-boggling here is the sheer power they both brought to the table. They clashed so hard that their energies actually canceled each other out, reverting them both back to their normal human forms. But in the final moments, it was the Hulk who landed the knockout blow on the Century. Now even after this fight, the Hulk, still seething with anger, almost tore New York apart just by taking a step. That's how crazy powerful he was, even after tangling with Century, so it's kind of safe to say that the Hulk technically won the battle, but man, the strength here on display was off the charts. If you're enjoying this video so far, please support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell.
Number 8. Uranos vs. Magneto. During an X-Men Red tie-in issue for the AXE Judgment Day event, in a fight that lasted barely a page and a half, Uranos completely, and I mean completely, destroys Magneto. And I really do mean literally destroys him. And never mind Magneto, although that brief battle is something to behold, Uranos completely wrecks most of planet Arakko too. Well, him and his army, but I mean, still, wrecking a whole planet, that's insane. Well, Magneto would later on get some sweet revenge on Uranos. In the first fight the two have here, Uranos manages to wrench Magneto's heart from his body, seemingly killing him. However, we later learn, of course, that Magneto manages to stay alive to fight another day by, get this, literally controlling the metal in his blood. What? Controlling its flow throughout his body, even without a heart, basically using the iron in his blood to pump the blood throughout his body. That's what? That's crazy. Number 7. Dream vs. Karanzan. One of my favorite fights I have ever read in any book, comic or otherwise, happens of course in the Sandman series. This fight happens during the first main arc in the Sandman comic series, when Dream is tasked with reclaiming his symbols of office. In order to get back his helm in the comics, he must journey to Hell to battle and defeat the demon currently in possession of it, one of Beelzebub's, a demon named Karanzan. This battle is described as being the oldest game, that of basically imagining. One can lose through hesitation, inability to take up a solid defensive stance, or lack of imagination. Karanzan conjures up the anti-life in the hopes of finally beating Dream after a long fight. Initially badly beaten by Karanzan's move, Dream does end up winning in the end, proving himself the epitome of imagination, as what else are dreams really, by conjuring up the concept of hope. Number 6. Batman and Robin vs. Green Lantern. Oh boy, what can I say about this one? Well, it comes from Frank Miller's All-Star Batman and Robin, so I think you can imagine how it goes. I will say Frank Miller is like the king of brutal fights, I would say, in comics. Yeah, All-Star Batman and Robin is honestly, it's an experience. If you want to check it out, all the power to you. In issue number 9, Green Lantern comes to try and tell Batman he's taken things too far, warning him that he's putting people in danger and imploring him to please stop. Seemingly, Hal's house call is triggered specifically by the fact that he's accusing Batman of kidnapping Dick Grayson, who he does not know but suspects is Batman's sidekick, Robin. Batman doesn't want to hear it and blatantly denies Hal's accusations, even though, as we know, they are true. As we can see from the beginning of the issue, Batman has also been preparing for Hal's arrival and for this specific confrontation by painting everything yellow. Needless to say, it doesn't go well for Hal. Number 5. Bane vs. Alfred. What could possibly be worse than the loss of Batman's parents when he was young? How about the loss of his confidant, his butler, and the person who, for longer even than his own parents, has honestly been a parental figure to him, Alfred? I don't think it gets much more brutal than this. While the death of Batman's parents is obviously very tragic, Alfred was there to help pick up the pieces afterwards and in essence helped to raise the boy even before his parents passed. He was probably one of the closest people to Batman. Alfred was shockingly killed by Bane after being kidnapped by the villain. When Damian Wayne didn't take Bane's threat seriously and set out to save Alfred, Bane responded in kind by ending Alfred's life. Not only is this brutal for Alfred, obviously, but this was all part of Bane's greater plan to basically break Batman again, but this time psychologically. Number 4, Joker versus Batman. Not just any Joker either for this point. We're talking about Emperor Joker. This is an extremely powerful version of the Joker if you aren't familiar with him. He basically gets 99.99% of Mr. Mixie's Piddlix power after tricking him out of it. Mr. Mixie was going to give Joker only 1%, but as I said, he was tricked out of basically almost all of his power instead, which is, I imagine, what would happen if you're trying to make a deal with the Joker. The Joker uses his newfound power to do a bunch of brutal things, one of which is tormenting Batman on a daily basis before killing him each and every day, only to resurrect him, bringing Batman back so he could of course do it all again. This was so traumatic for Batman that eventually when Superman does manage to use Batman's existence to basically defeat the Joker, restoring the world to normal, Superman is forced to take Batman's memories of the daily torment actually from his mind. Otherwise, Batman would actually have been unable to operate as a hero because this experience literally breaks him. Number 3, Superman versus Lois Lane. This one really is a brutal beatdown, and it's not one that's intentional, FYI. It's hard to read and honestly helps to justify most of Superman's actions, at least at the start of the Injustice Elseworld story. At the start of Injustice, Joker and Harley Quinn end up manipulating Superman into basically killing Lois, by making him think he's fighting Doomsday. In doing so, they not only have Lois killed, but also her and Superman's future offspring, and all of Metropolis gets blown up too. Unsurprisingly, Superman does not take this very well and ultimately becomes corrupted by the pain of all this loss. Number 2, Damian Wayne versus Damian Wayne. Batman has lost a lot of Robins over the years and a lot of adopted sons, but Damian Wayne is his biological heir, the son of Bruce Wayne and Talia al Ghul. He was raised by Talia and the League of Assassins without Batman even really knowing of his existence until years later when Talia just dropped him off on Bruce's doorstep. Initially, the two did not get along very well. Damian insisted on killing their enemies as he'd been trained to do his whole life. But eventually, he did come around and began to see the value in his father's approach to fighting crime, respecting it and even honestly admiring it. Just as their relationship began to evolve into something more resembling a true father-son connection, Damian was tragically killed by the Heretic, a death that Batman can't even bring himself to avenge when he realizes that the Heretic is Damian's clone. Number 1, Mera versus Aquaman. Mera and Aquaman are often presented as being romantic partners and sometimes as a crime-fighting Atlantean duo as well. However, this doesn't mean they never fight, especially when things get really comic booky. And during the Blackest Night, things did get really comic booky and they actually had some really good reason to fight. At that time, Aquaman had been possessed by the Black Lanterns, joining their forces, and Mera was driven into a rage by the death of last standing family member Tempest, causing her to become a Red Lantern. One of the coolest bits of character development for her, which allowed Mera to really tap into, I would say, years of bubbling rage. Talk about a woman and her power. During one page in Green Lantern issue number 50 from the 2005 volume of the series, Mera takes on the deceased Aquaman, and when he attempts to emotionally manipulate her to basically win her over, trying to distract her from her rage by attempting to bond with her over the loss of their son, ultimately it fails. Mera frightens him off masterfully by responding, "I've never wanted children," before seemingly defeating both of the undead that are confronting her here with her liquid napalm blood.
Starting us off today is a little guy who goes by the name Dr. Psycho. Now, Wonder Woman, being a warrior-bound Amazon, sometimes daughter of Zeus, is one tough lady, and as you'd expect, a good chunk of her opponents are equally, if not more, physically intimidating and pack one heck of a punch. And then there's Dr. Psycho. Dr. Psycho is not physically intimidating at all. He is 3'9" with no kind of super strength. But what Dr. Psycho lacks in physicality, he makes up for in being absolutely psychotic, but also one of the strongest telepaths on the planet. Psycho can match up to Martian Manhunter in terms of his telepathic prowess, and can control multiple different minds with his powers at the same time. On top of that, he is just so incredibly sadistic. When combined with that absolute power, he can cause a bad day for even someone as capable as Wonder Woman. And before we move on, I'm curious, who are your favorite underappreciated villains in not just comics but in any form of media? Let me know down in the comments below. But next up on the docket for today is Lord Deathman. The Japanese crime boss known as Lord Deathman has battled Batman both in American comics and in Japanese manga, using his powers to seemingly overcome death itself, able to rise from the grave no matter what his injuries are. In his first appearance in Batman 180, Society in May 1966, he passed away 3 times using a yogi technique to appear passed away before the final conflict, which saw him actually get struck by lightning and go on to the pearly gates. But since then, he has actually gained the real power to come back from the grave, but at the cost of having a bare-bones skull for a head. His regenerative abilities are so powerful that his fluids are used to create the infamous Lazarus pits that Ra's al Ghul uses to stay young and immortal. One of the first ways Batman defeated Lord Deathman with his new powers is honestly a little out of character for the Crusader. He threw Lord Deathman off of a building into the path of an armored car, which took the criminal down just long enough for Catwoman to lock him in a safe, and then he was shot out into space, and he still somehow came back. Next up is Rogal Zar. Rogal Zar is basically an alien warlord who was actually created by the papa of Superman, Jor-El. Rogal was responsible for destroying Krypton along with Empress Gandello of the Trillium Collective. He went on to later invade the Fortress of Solitude, and he destroyed the shrunken Kryptonian city of Kandor. Now, following a series of battles with Superman and Supergirl, the pair were only able to come out on top when the Girl of Steel used a Phantom Zone projector to send Zar to the Phantom Zone. Now, all of that is pretty impressive, but what really sold a lot of people on his actual raw power was later on, when Rogal escaped from the Phantom Zone, leading an army of criminals, including General Zod, who then turned on him. He did battle with Superman, Supergirl, General Zod, John Kent, and even Crypto the dog, all at the same time, until the Thanagarians showed up and put Zar in permanent stasis. Clifford Smek was a participant in a government experiment which caused him to tap into the quantum field, which allowed him to then manipulate dark matter. Now, we have no idea what that really means because we don't even really know what dark matter is, but in DC Comics, the dark matter in Major Force's body allows him to do incredible things like absorb energy, fly, regenerate, and even create light constructs like a Green Lantern can. Another side effect of all this concentrated energy inside of him means that he will go off like a nuclear boom boom if he is cut. That on its own is a huge power boost, simply because now, as a result, most superheroes can't even risk fighting Major Force, just in case they cut him. But then, on top of that, even if he does go off, ripping apart his own body on an atomic level, the dark matter that he controls will just put Major Force back together again. And that's not even everything. Not only is Major Force a physical threat, but he is also, just to top it off, a psychological genius. Simply by talking to the Green Lantern Kyle Rayner, Major Force convinced the superhero to give up his own power ring, the source of his power, and one of the most dangerous things in the universe. Prometheus is going to be up next on our list today, and heroes and villains with no powers always seem to be some of the most powerful. It's kind of strange. Prometheus, after seeing his criminal parents pass away at the hands of the police, he vows a vendetta on any form of justice, a vendetta that would push him to be able to defeat the entire Justice League single-handedly. He shot the Martian Manhunter with a dart that turned his powers against him and set him on fire. He infected Steel's armor with a computer virus which commanded the suit to damage the Watchtower. He hypnotized the Huntress into unconsciousness, attacked Green Lantern with a neural chaff that rendered his ring useless. He trapped the angel Zariel in limbo, tricked the Flash into believing that he had planted motion-sensitive devices that would just go off if the Flash used his powers, and he defeated Batman in hand-to-hand combat, which is nuts. His origin is very similar to Batman's. After his parents were dispatched from the mortal plane, he would travel the globe training and becoming the ultimate combat machine. But he also attended all the top universities, learning as much as he could. He eventually set up a base in the Ghost Zone, and from here he built an armor that could download information on any opponent's fighting style, and reminiscent of Taskmaster's ability from Marvel Comics. He is kind of crazy capable, but his vendetta on any kind of justice, plus his Batman likeness, just kind of makes him a little weird to me. Now, following the Civil War event, which we just talked about before, Tony Stark became the head of S.H.I.E.L.D., and he got one of the worst calamities to deal with in the form of Secret Invasion, where it was revealed that the shape-shifting aliens known as the Skrulls had basically infiltrated the Earth, with many of the world's heroes actually being Skrulls in disguise. At the end of that event, Norman Osborn was the one to actually save the day, and he made Tony Stark look so bad that Norman was actually given control of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers. But he made some big changes. Norman took the villains Daken, Venom, Moonstone, and Bullseye and repackaged them as Wolverine, Spider-Man, Ms. Marvel, and Hawkeye.
Joining them up with heroes Ares, the Sentry, and Novar, Osborn himself donned Stark Tech armor to become the Iron Patriot, and this team became known as the Dark Avengers to fans. Villains taking over as the world's premier superhero team went just about as well as you'd expect it to. Now normally it's the Avengers who are going on the offensive in order to defeat the villains, but in Avengers Under Siege, it was the Avengers who took the beating. Determined to destroy the team who he believed had taken out his father, Baron Zemo II created a new version of the Masters of Evil, and under his leadership, this team of villains took down the Avengers with a quickness. They blitzed the heroes, taking their base of operations from them, and they put a few of the Avengers in the hospital, with Hercules, Captain America, and even their butler Jarvis being really badly injured. Not to mention the damage that they did to civilians along the way. The Masters of Evil took way too much pleasure in their job, and they were very effective. The Avengers were left without a home, beaten and demoralized. Now obviously things changed and the villains were eventually defeated, but we the fans hadn't seen the Avengers this badly beaten up until this point. The Avengers assemble. It's their thing. So naturally, when they're disassembled, it's not a good time. And it's mainly thanks to the Scarlet Witch. Wanda and the Wasp were just kind of chilling by the pool when Wasp decided to mention Wanda's kids. The only problem is that the existence of her children had actually been wiped from her mind, and when Wasp brought it up, it brought all those memories back, and Wanda absolutely lost it. Several things happened next, with none of the Avengers even knowing the cause. For starters, Scott Lang, Ant-Man, lost his life when a previously deceased Jack of Hearts showed up and just detonated. While the heroes were trying to figure out what even just happened, Vision showed up saying that he was not in control of himself and that he is sorry, as he also began to detonate, and then Jennifer Walters, She-Hulk, began to get uncharacteristically raged and tore Vision in half. Next, we saw Tony Stark at the UN conference randomly start to act as though he was incredibly drunk, even though he hadn't had a single drink, and he verbally accosted the Latvian ambassador and threatened him, and then a whole invasion by the Kree just randomly came out of nowhere, resulting in the passing of Hawkeye, and then the Kree just randomly left as quickly as they showed up. All of that was actually Wanda Maximoff using her reality warping magic. It almost led to the superhero community deciding to put Wanda into the afterlife, and it led directly to the House of M story. Now, while some brutal Avengers moments take place on a universal scale, some are much more personal, and the court-martial of Yellowjacket is exactly that. Hank Pym is a founding member of the Avengers, but his legacy took a very drastic turn, and surprisingly, it wasn't because he was the one who created Ultron. Hank had a bit of a mental breakdown, and he ended up going by the name of Yellowjacket, and that's fine. Call yourself whatever you want, but if you strike your wife, then no one is going to respect you, and that's exactly what happened. When Hank hit Janet Van Dyne, it basically became the defining moment for his character, and there was no way he could come back. But then he made it even worse. Pym essentially orchestrated a robot attack on the Avengers, and he figured that if he destroyed the robot, he could earn back the Avengers' respect. After Janet Van Dyne defeated the robot herself, Pym was kicked out of the team, and his marriage ended pretty soon after that. But finally, in at number 1 today, with a title like Marvel Ruins, you can imagine it's not all sunshine and rainbows, and it really wasn't. This is a story taking place in an alternate comic book universe where literally everything that could go possibly wrong does go wrong. It's honestly best to just list off some of the events, then get specific here. The Fantastic Four's spacecraft crashed into the Earth, and Ben Grimm was left with survivor's guilt, because he was the only one who survived. The Incredible Hulk is not so incredible in this universe, and the gamma radiation that he experienced left him as a hulking mass of tumors and deformity, and it's horrifying. Thanks to the radioactive spider, Spider-Man did not gain the abilities of a spider, but he instead developed an incredibly brutal mutant virus that left him with a terrible skin rash and had him captured and quarantined by the government. The Scarlet Witch in this universe betrayed the Avengers to the government, leading to the Quinjet being blown up with all of them inside. Nick Fury was introduced to the idea of eating other people by Captain America of all people, and Johnny Blaze just sets himself on fire as a stunt and does not survive. Even Magneto goes off the deep end here, with his powers going out of control in an airport, destroying literally everything. The whole story just leaves you wondering what you're supposed to do with your life now. It's very, very, very bad.
Speaking of which, let's start with Old Man Logan. The Hulk and Wolverine have had one of the oddest rivalries. It all started when the Wolverine was introduced in the Hulk comics, in the Incredible Hulk issue number 181, and they've had many rematches over the years, with some of the most notable appearing in What If, Volume 2, number 50, Ultimate Wolverine vs. Hulk, World War Hulk, X-Men, Savage Wolverine number 5, and The Incredible Hulk number 340. But their nastiest bout was definitely in Old Man Logan. Following a huge conflict where the villains managed to band together and wipe out almost all the heroes, a pretty sinister Bruce Banner took over a section of California with his inbred kids, the Hulk Gang. In the last few issues of that story, in revenge for the Hulk wiping out his family, Wolverine went on the warpath and eradicated most of the gang. Banner hulked out into this 30-foot tall nasty Hulk and ate Wolverine alive, only for Wolverine to reform inside his stomach and cut his way out. This wasn't the end of the Hulk though, and Old Man Logan would face not only the Hulk again, but even his smarter, devious counterpart, the Maestro. Speaking of Maestro, that brings me to my next memorable moment. For any of you who might not know, Maestro is a version of the Hulk that came to us in the Future Imperfect storyline. Taking place in an alternate universe, thanks to a nuclear conflict that wiped out almost all the superheroes and most of humanity, the Hulk actually thrived. He began absorbing all this radiation from the conflict, making the strongest, smartest version of the Hulk that had been seen up until that point. Maestro Hulk took control of the remnants of New York, called Dystopia, and he ruled it with an iron fist. Future Imperfect essentially gave us our regular 616 Professor Hulk, traveling to this alternate future and facing the Maestro version of himself. Maestro completely pummeled the living snot out of Professor Hulk, eventually snapping his neck, and then villain monologuing at him the whole time. Professor Hulk only won when he brought Maestro back in time to when the Gamma Bomb first went off, and he let Maestro succumb to the blast. As you do. When fights between Wolverine and Maestro were pretty brutal, another character who often fights the Hulk would be Hyperion. These two absolute powerhouses have also faced off a bunch of times, but if we're looking for brutality here, I shall turn your attention to Heroes Reborn number 2 by Jason Aaron. This story found a new Hyperion, who had just wiped out Galactus by flying straight through his head, fought off against versions of Gladiator and the Imperial Guard, Mr. Beyonder, and a giant version of Ultron. But the last thing he needed to do was stop the Hulk. Hyperion finds him trying to tell a group of kids about how he's not crazy, how history has changed, and how he's sad, which makes it almost upsetting after the Hulk gets his hands on Hyperion's throat. Hyperion invokes an executive order and uses his laser eyes to blow holes into the Hulk, taking his life until he finally stops getting back up. Let's move on to Emil Blonsky, who has been an enemy of the Incredible Hulk for a long time. So it doesn't come as a surprise that he's also taken some of the most brutal beatings that the Hulk has dished out. Granted, I'm not gonna say he doesn't deserve them. In Incredible Hulk issue 54 from 2004, Emil makes the small mistake during a massive scuffle of reminding Bruce/Hulk how he ended Betty Ross's life with his irradiated blood and asking if the Hulk ever thinks about that. And to that I say, my guy, what the heck are you thinking? To the shock and surprise of nobody, this throws Hulk into a fit of rage, double fisting Abomination into the sky and absolutely pummeling him, with one panel showing the Hulk punching Abomination so hard his fist looks like it completely implodes the villain's face, with chunks flying off. And then he throws Abomination into a helicopter. You know, just cuz. Just so we're aware, Abomination isn't a pushover. He regularly throws punches with the Hulk, even beating him a couple of times. But Hulk put him down in a few pages, and all it took was a mistake of a few choice words. Think before you speak, folks. The end series chronicles the last days of various different characters in the Marvel Universe. For a lot of Doomsday type stories, it often ends in the Earth being destroyed in a nuclear war. But what remains after that? Well, basically the Hulk. That's it. That's all. Just the end of the world and the Hulk. As the only human left on planet Earth, Bruce Banner wanders the aftermath in an eternal struggle with himself, as in an eternal struggle with the Hulk. Basically, Bruce has seen the deaths of everybody he loved, everybody he cared about. There's nothing left in this world for him, and he just wants to pass on. But no matter what he does, the Hulk's not gonna let him. Hulk not only stops Banner from ending his own life, but the Hulk doesn't succumb to anything. Not even giant mutated cockroaches that essentially swarmed and devoured as much of the Hulk as they could. Bruce and Hulk have a huge internal falling out, but then Bruce has a heart attack that actually ends his life, or at least half his life. Because while the Hulk himself goes on to survive, now he realizes just how alone he really is.
Next up, we got Tattooed Man. Abel Tarrant was a sailor who discovered a strange chemical that could bring drawings to life. Now, realizing the potential this chemical had, he inked his entire body with it and became the supervillain Tattooed Man. While performing crimes, his ink actually comes to life to attack his enemies. Over the years, he has fought superheroes with tattoos of tigers, cars, ships, monsters, bears, fire, planes, and dinosaurs. He can even use a tattoo of wings to give himself the ability to fly. Tattoo Man has never been considered a super serious threat, but I think he should be because he is only limited by his imagination. There is nothing stopping him from creating a tattoo of a nuclear boom boom or even a black hole. If he inked kryptonite onto his body, there's no reason that he couldn't take down Superman if he wanted to. Next up today is Dr. Sivana. It's almost ironic that some of the biggest and the strongest superheroes find their adversaries in the form of kind of creepy, somewhat old, bald men. Superman has Lex Luthor, who isn't old, but he is bald. And then for Shazam, he's got Dr. Sivana, who is indeed both old and bald. Sivana is not the kind of guy who's going to be engaging in a battle of fisticuffs, but that's fine because his strength is in the brain department. The villain doesn't have a ton of monumental feats, but one of his best comes to us in the Multiversity Thunderworld Adventures. In the opening pages of this comic, Sivana literally attacks the Rock of Eternity, which is the source of Shazam's powers and the home base for the wizard Shazam. This place has never ever been attacked for an eternity, and Sivana attacked it with a bigger Rock of Eternity, which is weird. He had his own Shazam-like team of superpowered children and his own multiversal duplicates helping him along. He manages to take the wizard Shazam prisoner and mine the rock for its own power, granting himself his own monstrous Shazam-like form, and it's crazy. Now, with a name like Psycho Pirate, it's easy to not take this villain too seriously, but Roger Hayden is quite the capable guy. Hayden wears a faceplate called the Medusa Mask, which can control the emotions of anyone nearby, and he staunchly believed that this was his ticket to riches and power. When heroes or the police try to stop his crime sprees, Psycho Pirate just uses his mask to overwhelm his opponents with shame, guilt, depression, or any other number of emotions. He can also make a person develop a phobia of anything he wants them to be afraid of. Like, in his debut issue, he made Dr. Fate, one of the most powerful magic users in DC Comics, develop Cytophobia, aka the fear of food. And then he attacked Fate with a pizza. That's amazing! Psycho Pirate has played a huge part in some of the biggest DC comics ever, including Crisis on Infinite Earths and Infinite Crisis. If you needed more proof, Amanda Waller, the head of the Task Force X program, aka the Suicide Squad, has claimed that Psycho Pirate is one of the scariest beings in the universe, calling him, quote, a man who could make gods go mad, a man who could make the mad gods sane again. And in our second place today is Extant. Henry Hall, the brother of Donald Hall, aka Dove, started his comic book life as Hawk, being empowered alongside his brother by a Lord of Chaos and a Lord of Order who had fallen in love. Now, Henry represented chaos. Hawk and Dove together were vigilantes and were even part of the Teen Titans for a time. After the Crisis on Infinite Earths, however, in a dystopian near future that was home to a time-traveling hero called Wave Rider, Henry had become an oppressive tyrant named Monarch who ended up going back in time and fighting the modern-day heroes before he was wiped out by the Henry of the present day. I hope you can follow that because it was kind of hard for me to follow when I read it. Present-day Henry then took up the Monarch title and mantle in the modern day, becoming a villain. Now, eventually, Monarch stole the time powers from Wave Rider and then allied himself with Parallax, aka the corrupted Hal Jordan, and he took on the new villain name of Extant. While he was the front for Parallax's scheme to recreate the multiverse using alternate timelines, he tried to alter time to give himself an entire army of superheroes and found himself battling all the greatest members of the JSA. And Extant tore through them all like they were a joke, and he even used his temporal powers to age up the members of the JSA that he didn't just straight up send to the afterlife. And lastly today, I think anyone who hasn't heard of this villain before would be forgiven. When you think of the most fearsome villains, specifically the villains of Captain Marvel, otherwise known as Shazam, you may not first think about the 7-inch long sentient worm from Venus known as Mr. Mind. This diabolically evil mind-controlling worm, after the events of Infinite Crisis, would cocoon himself and then emerge as a massive monstrosity capable of manipulating reality, consuming universes, and traveling through time and space. He was described as, quote, eating years and events from this universe's history, altering the Earth with every flap of his giant wings. It took a combined effort from Booster Gold, Supernova, and Skeets to defeat Mr. Mind by trapping him inside Skeets' shell, which was fortified by the Suspendium. Then, Booster Gold threw Skeets through time with the help of Supernova to the day that he was first discovered on Earth by Dr. Sivana, and then he's trapped in a time loop forever. So they didn't actually end him or defeat him, they just trapped him. This all-powerful, mind-controlling 7-inch long worm.
Invincible. What makes these fights stand out isn't just the brutality, but the emotional connection you have to these characters involved, which honestly makes them not just physically brutal, but honestly emotionally brutal as well. Take for example the fighting between Conquest and Invincible. Conquest arrived at a time when Mark was going through some pretty intense stuff, so he was ready to let go and punch something as hard as he could. However, this is Conquest we're talking about, so even when Atom Eve flew in to act as backup, this fight ended up becoming quite messy. Like many fights in Invincible, this one spanned multiple issues, being wrapped up in issue number 65 after coming to a very gruesome end in issue number 64. Speaking of gruesome, let's turn to something that is also very gruesome. Is it more gruesome? I guess in some parts it kind of is actually. We're talking about Walking Dead. Honestly, reading this fight just made my jaw literally drop. Now granted, I'm not as well versed in the Walking Dead series, so anytime I come to this comic and read a few issues, I'm always pretty much shocked by what I read here. It's a lot of a lot. And this instance of course was no different. In fact, it is probably a beatdown that'll stay with me for some time. In this fight, Rick takes on a group of marauders, unlike in the Walking Dead show where this group is actually more specific, a group we've become familiar with who are known as the Claimers. In the comic, they're just kind of like a random group, I believe, of awful survivors. In the comics, Rick also only has one hand at this point, so keep that in mind, having lost it to the governor. But even with him having both hands in the show at this point, they made the ending to this fight the same. And both endings are brutal. With Rick in a bind, his arms restricted at his sides, he's asked, "What are you going to do now?" He responds by biting the man's neck, zombie style. Yeah. Also, I just love how so many of the images from the show and the comic in this fight, like when I went back to watch the scene, are like one for one from the panels. It's pretty awesome. Up next, Marco and Alana are the two main characters from the Saga series. At least, they are at the start. The series begins with them both in the middle of delivering their first child while also being hunted down for having said child together. And while they do get away initially, they eventually are hunted down by the military before they're able to safely leave the planet. As such, they're forced to fight and defend their new little family unit. Alana is a deserter who takes no issue with fighting back, but Marco actually swore to be a pacifist since his daughter was born, but something in him snaps when he sees his family in danger. He reverts to a version of himself probably not yet seen since his own time in the war, brutally fighting the attackers. Fortunately, Alana is able to rein him in and calm him down, reminding him of his pacifist oath. This next one is honestly one of the most surprising brutal beatdowns I have ever read. This one also comes from Saga. I love Saga, in case you didn't know. I'm not up to date on it by any means, but everything that I've read so far in this series I've been obsessed with, and I really do want to get up to date. I just need to read a lot of things. There's a lot of issues. It's just such a great series overall though, so it really is worth the time. If you haven't checked it out, I do highly recommend just getting even that first volume and giving it a read. It'll hook you. Just the first few issues should be enough to just blow your mind. This brutal beatdown is also from near the beginning of the story as well. The Will is a bounty hunter. He has also been given the contract to hunt down Alana and Marco, but kinda early on he decides he might give up on the contract. Feeling he's already been beaten, he decides to use his unlimited credit card that he was given for the job to basically entertain himself. But while pursuing this entertainment, he runs into a really bad guy. Now most characters in Saga are very grayscale when it comes to their alignment, both capable of good and bad deeds. The Will honestly included. He's kind of terrible, but also he's got some pros. But I think we can all agree that this guy, the one he's up against, is like the actual worst. He's very bad. Needless to say, the Will surprised me by making very quick work of him. Discombobulate, bringing it to a new level. I don't even know if you can show it, that's how brutal it is. But basically, it's giving him one of these, the head squeeze. Moving on, the Whispering War is something we saw happen in both the comics of Walking Dead and the show. The show depicted the war a bit differently from the comics. There it was more like a literal war with armies on each side, and one side hunting down and eradicating the other in the end to win.
While Bruce is naturally the core figure in his family tree, the roots of the Hulk's rage actually come from his father, Brian Banner. and without him, there really wouldn't be a Hulk. Now for this point, I'm not really talking about one specific moment, because the brutal part of this is the character of Brian Banner entirely. If there's a villain in the story, it's Brian. He physically and emotionally mistreated his wife Rebecca and their son. As seen in Incredible Hulk number 312 from 1968, Brian became deeply disturbed and obsessed with this idea that his radiation research had turned his son, Bruce, into a little monster. Brian was even responsible for the passing of Rebecca in front of Bruce, which led directly to the development of multiple personalities for Bruce, including the Hulk, which is essentially the personification of rage in a child who has been severely mistreated. Now if I were forced to pick one moment, it would be when Brian actually died, which appeared to be at the hands of Bruce himself in a graveyard, as one does. All of which happened in the Incredible Hulk issue 1, by the way. It's honestly incredibly tragic. Years later, during the Chaos War, Brian actually emerged on Earth as a fearsome Hulk of his own before he was defeated and returned to the afterlife. More recently, Brian made a lot of trouble in Immortal Hulk as a servant or incarnation of the One Below All. Near the end of the Planet Hulk storyline, the shuttle the Hulk was sent to Sakharin by the Illuminati at the beginning of the Planet Hulk storyline blows up, wiping out the Green Scar's wife and child. Hulk reaches a whole new level of anger, which is directed at those who sent him here, the Illuminati. So he headed to Earth with his Warsworn. He made a quick stop on the moon to defeat Black Bolt of the Inhumans, but when he got to Earth he headed to New York, giving the city a time limit to be evacuated, and when that time limit stopped, well, he defeated everyone who was left. Iron Man and the Hulkbuster, the Avengers and their tower, the US Army, the X-Men, Fantastic Four, Juggernaut, Doctor Strange, using the power of Zom. You know, one of the most powerful magical monsters in all of Marvel Comics, all while saving innocent bystanders. He then threw the Illuminati members he captured into the ring against each other, sparing them since he only really sought justice. He was eventually sorta defeated by the Sentry, who he fought until they both reverted back to their human forms, which is when Bruce Banner knocked Bob Reynolds right out. And then the comic version of Miek takes the life of Bruce's friend Rick, and the Hulk just goes absolutely ballistic, creating earthquakes with his footsteps and almost destroying the world. It would appear Tony Stark grew a little tired of getting beat up by the Hulk over the years. This basically came to a breaking point in the Immortal Hulk story when the Hulk faces off against the Avengers and Stark's pretty new Hulkbuster gets completely wrecked. This caused him to use what he referred to as the Big Gun, aka the Helios laser, a massive space laser laced with UV radiation that, when unleashed onto the Hulk during one of his rampages, completely fried the Hulk to dust. When Hulk woke up, since, you know, he's immortal in this story now, he could be terminated, so instead he found that he'd been sliced up with an adamantium razor and placed in a dozen different jars. He had his hand in one, his heart in another, his lungs on another shelf. It's pretty messed up, since a jar with his living head was basically forced to watch as a scientist dissected him further to study. Yeah. No thank you, hard pass. In 1995, Marvel released the last Avengers story, and with a title like that, from 1995, you can imagine it's not exactly all sunshines and rainbows. And you'd be correct. Within the first few pages, the current Avengers of this alternate future and their base are completely wiped out by an absolutely massive explosion caused by Ultron 59. But that's not even the worst part. At some time in the past, this universe's version of the Incredible Hulk turned evil, thanks to an event that happened fighting alongside Thor, The Thing, and Hercules. The Hulk turned against his fellow Avengers, Wonder Man, Hawkeye, Mockingbird, and Tigra, who absolutely got it the worst. Tigra against the Hulk is not a fight you would normally expect, and this comic tells you why. Since in her attack against the Green Goliath, Hulk simply grabs her by her legs and arms and pulls her apart in a scene kind of like Sentry ripping apart Ares in the Siege event, but way scarier and more terrifying. Hawkeye and Mockingbird literally flee for their lives, while Wonder Man flew into a rage and he and the Hulk had a slugfest that ended with Wonder Man detonating and wiping both himself and the Hulk from existence. I know I've already mentioned one instance from the Immortal Hulk storyline that I felt was extremely nuts, but to be quite honest, the entire story is one big brutal collection. What's happening in some of the comic panels is almost hard to even decipher, as the legendary art is grabbing every inch of your attention, with horrifying body horror that I've never really seen in a comic before. There's nothing like this. Moments where he escaped from those jars he had been placed into, and his different displaced parts start merging together around this helpless scientist who basically gets consumed by the body of Hulk, or when the leader basically becomes a horrifying monster swallowing Brian Banner and ripping the Devil Hulk apart, or when Hulk rips his own face off, or when he mutates into a giant monster at the end of one particular timeline and destroys literally everything in existence, consuming the sentience of the universe. The whole Immortal Hulk run is just pure horror from start to finish, wrapped in an incredible Hulk wrapping paper.
Coming home to your secret cave and or manor, only to find Bane, a hulking behemoth of a man, waiting to greet you. That would be terrifying, and that is exactly what happens in Batman number 497. Bane had organized a prison breakout in a secret attempt, sort of, to exhaust the Batman, to wind him down and break him down. So now, when this worn down, caught off guard Batman watches as Bane pumps himself full of venom, the very thing that Bruce is also suffering withdrawals from, and is talking about how Bruce Wayne is just a mask, but a useless one, but his mask is very much useful, and then he's like, so you are familiar with venom, then you know what it can do. And he explains how his venom is way more potent, and then Batman gets a bit of a good speech, I'll give him that, it was pretty good, and he jumps into combat, and Bane's just nope, and he gives Batman an absolute thrashing. He's throwing Batman around and beating the tar out of the guy, and Batman is reliving all of his beatings up until this point, but they're nothing like this, and Alfred literally can't even handle it, and he goes crawling off to get the Bat family, and Batman is so exhausted that he can only try to dodge or just take the hits, but he goes to punch Bane, and it's nothing, and then Bane's you are already broken, and then Bane just wipes the floor, the ceilings, the walls with Bruce Wayne, breaks his back, and then he leaves him destroyed on the ground. It's sick, and it's sick and twisted, but it's awesome. Next up today, the Wolverine villain Cyber is, in my opinion, kind of underrated, but he's one of the only villains to actually terrify the mutant, with some adamantium-coated skin, toxic claws, and the power to track an individual's brain. Oh, and he's 9 feet tall and massive. In 1994's Wolverine number 79, Cyber is tracking down Wolverine in order to claim his adamantium bones, which he wants to then make a profit from. Unfortunately, at this time, Wolverine actually doesn't have the adamantium fused to his bones. So when the fight leads to him popping his bone claws, Cyber is a little bit disappointed. But instead of just walking away after this revelation, a cannon goes off nearby, and this gives Wolverine the opportunity to slash Cyber across the face. But as soon as the attack happens, Cyber catches Wolverine's fist, and in one stomp, he snaps Wolverine's claws in half. This event scarred Wolverine, but right after it, even made him question his ability as a hero without his adamantium. Marvel's Civil War number 2 is not the greatest, and it makes Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, to be someone who is just pretty unlikable. She just makes really weird decisions that get people hurt badly, like taking her Ultimates, admittedly a pretty powerful team, to take on Thanos thanks to an inhuman precognitive telling her that he will be there. Thanos shows up looking for the Cosmic Cube, which isn't actually on Earth, and Carol's tactic of just hit him as hard as you can, as fast as you can, probably sounds good, but it's also not really a plan at all. Carol absorbs an energy blast, the Human Torch is able to hit him with some fire, She-Hulk gets to pin him down, giving Carol and Dazzler the chance to blast him, and War Machine gets to lay down some fire. Thanos, sure, he's a little bruised, but he is a-okay, because when the Inhuman Medusa tries to use her hair to bind Thanos, he grabs that hair and flings her straight into War Machine, who accidentally fires a missile at She-Hulk. Then, in the chaos following that explosion, Thanos springs on War Machine, punching him straight through the chest with his massive, Mad Titan purple grimace fist. Then, the Ultimates are able to hit Thanos hard enough to end the fight, but damn. Now listen nerds, I gotta be honest, I never realized how vicious the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles can actually be. Taking place in IDW's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles issue number 44, the Turtles got split up. Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raph are on a mission to stop Krang from literally destroying all life on Earth using the Technodrome, leaving Donatello alone with his bow staff, facing off against Bebop and Rocksteady, who were given orders to send Donnie to the grave. Now that bow staff gets maybe one hit in before Rocksteady uses a sledgehammer to send Donnie flying, and Bebop just snaps the staff in half over his knee. Even with some assistance from Metalhead, Donnie is still at a disadvantage, and as he tries to escape, he gets a TV chucked at him, and then he gets slapped across the face with a computer keyboard. Then the pair just go to town on the lone turtle before Rocksteady uses that sledgehammer to crack open Donnie's shell. It is brutal. Luckily though, they are called off before they can fully finish the job.
Moving right along, Urizen is basically one of the worst of the worst of the worst when it comes to Spawn comics. He's a powerful villain and a mortal god who was basically imprisoned on Earth by the combined forces of heaven and hell. Yeah, that's how bad he is. Heaven and hell were willing to work together to take him down. However, Urizen was eventually freed from his prison and escaped. This was a world-ending scenario, not just because of Urizen's own power, but because his being unleashed was part of a plan crafted by Malbolgia to spark Armageddon on Earth. When Spawn first fought Urizen, it didn't go well, to say the least, which is why when he returned empowered by the ruler of Greenworld, Gaia herself, Earth, the beatdown felt pretty cathartic. If Spawn versus Urizen was cathartic, this next point was heart-wrenching. One of the most heartfelt fights you probably weren't expecting is the one that happens between Throg or Thrag, I'm still not sure how we're gonna say that, I'm waiting to hear it, in the animated series, and Omni-Man. These two fought during issue 138 of Invincible in a rematch. After Throg had been banished, he created his own hybrid child army by teaming up with the Thraxans. He had a lot of kids while he was away, and when he returned he sicked his offspring on Earth and took his own fight directly to Nolan. You might wonder how or why we'd ever feel bad for what happens to Omni-Man here if you're a fan of the animated series, but trust me when I say that Omni-Man is way more complex than you might otherwise think. Well, season 1, and I would say kinda still the first half of season 2, even paints him as like a pretty antagonistic and kinda like shady dude. There is definitely more to him than that. And at the end of the day, he's still Mark's dad. While the two have had their issues, Mark honestly does love him. Even when he's being a jerk, he loves him. Even when he's in denial, he does love him. And at this point in the comics, he was more redeemed than we've seen him before, which is why it was heartbreaking when we watched Nolan be brutally defeated by Throg, who not only put his fist through Nolan's chest, aiming for his heart, but then, when he missed, he just tore Nolan open. Terrible. Switching over to a different comic series with this next point, Spawn and Zera are opposites. While Spawn is one of the most powerful beings in hell, especially after Malbolgia is defeated, Zera is God's most prized warrior. She was an angel whom God granted immortality to so she can never die. At a time in Spawn when the war between heaven and hell was very dangerously present on Earth, these two meet up, and Spawn, basically being God tier at that time, makes quick work of Zera, slicing her in half. What's even more brutal is that Zera would survive this fight, but only as like a disembodied head due to her immortality. Cause yeah, she can't die, which in that way kind of becomes a curse when you're just a head. Spawn might be brutal, but there is another series that I think of first when it comes to beatdowns. I talked about it at the beginning of the list, you know where I'm going. I wish I could limit how much I talk about Invincible, but truly it's challenging. I just love it so much. The series is just so good, and it honestly is some of the most brutal beatdowns in comic book history. So yeah, we're going back there again. I'm gonna talk about it again. This fight is now one that many know about thanks to the Invincible animated series. As Omni-Man's true motivations are revealed to Mark, the two come to blows, and while Invincible is reluctant to fight against his father, Omni-Man is less inclined to hold back, honestly. This fight was so brutal, it quickly became one of the most iconic and most memeable ones ever. Seriously, it's between Invincible and Omni-Man for me, and Anakin and Obi-Wan in terms of like equally memeable and memorable brutal fights. Both of those are very memeable, I think. Next up, this has to be one of the most brutal fights within Image and within, honestly, all of comics. It spanned 5 issues and multiple days, with the series popping back to just remind you each issue, yeah, that's still going on. Those two are still fighting. I can't even give you one issue to read because that simply just doesn't exist. As it unfolds, it gets more and more brutal and gruesome. This is mainly because this fight goes down between Throg and Battle Beast. These two fight because Battle Beast has decided to team up with the coalition of planets and is sent to defeat Throg. But what he's truly after is not necessarily to complete his mission, but to die a warrior's death here. He sees Throg as his equal or possibly his superior when it comes to battle and hopes to die at his hands, or defeat one of the few who has actually managed to stand against him. To give you an example of just how intense this fight is, in the beginning, Throg is badly wounded when Ragnars are also unleashed from Battle Beast's ship at the start of their fight. Battle Beast was told that the Ragnars wouldn't be unleashed except as a last resort, and if you don't know this, Ragnars are basically some of the ultimate enemies against Viltrumites because they can actually break their skin. One of the few beings in the cosmos who can break a Viltrumite's skin, to be clear. After defeating the Ragnars, Battle Beast notices Throg's wound and injures himself to match to once again ensure this fight is fair. So not only does Battle Beast turn on the Ragnars, but then he also was like, oh, you're wounded? Me too. Now we fight again. And then they fight for days.
Kicking us off today is Marvel's Civil War event. This whole event kicked off because of a guy named Nitro. This villain has the power to explode, and when he did this, hopped up on a new substance, he wiped out the entire town of Stamford, Connecticut. This split the entire superhuman community down the middle, with Tony Stark leading half of them under the idea of superhuman registration, and Captain America leading the other half who opposed this. Wolverine partnered up with the former, and he was given a very specific task: to track down Nitro and bring him to justice. But when Wolverine actually managed to track the guy down, the villain did what he does best: explode. And when it happened here, he managed to completely incinerate Wolverine down to his shiny adamantium bones. But speaking of Wolverine's shiny bones, they did in fact lose their luster at one point, and that was more than brutal enough for this list. In the 1993 crossover event Fatal Attractions, Magneto was offering mutants sanctuary on his ship, the Avalon, and recovering from the legacy virus he was planning to completely wipe out humanity, being opposed only by the X-Men. Xavier, in a special Shi'ar suit, leads the fight against Magneto on Avalon, and Magneto holds everyone off until Wolverine gets the drop on him. Wolverine makes it really close, slicing Magneto across the chest just a little bit too close for comfort, and this pushes Magneto over the edge. He basically turns the adamantium on Wolverine's skeleton into liquid and quite literally pulls it out of his body. It's gruesome. But there is actually more than one character to take on the Wolverine name. X-23's origin story was told in the 2004 miniseries X-23 Innocence Lost, which takes Laura Kinney from conception to independence, and man does she go through the ringer. Laura, unlike most of the other mutants, was created in a lab. This lab was called the Facility, and it's where attempts were being made to clone Wolverine/Weapon X from a recovered sample of his own DNA. The problem is that the sample was incomplete, resulting in constant failures. It was the work of a brilliant geneticist named Sarah Kinney that finally made the project a success when she combined her own DNA with that of the sample to create a genetic replica with near identical powers to the original Wolverine. This clone became labeled X-23, but Sarah secretly named her Laura. X-23 was trained from birth to be an assassin, treated fairly extremely and exposed to a trigger scent that would cause her to lose all control and give in to a brutal rage. The organization used this trigger scent to have her wipe out her sensei, as well as to make money off of her as an 11-year-old super assassin. Now eventually her mother, for lack of a better term, realized that she needed to free Laura. Plus, she also learned that the facility was creating more clones, intending to train them in the same way, and she decided that she needed to take them all out. Thanks to Sarah, X-23 managed to destroy the facility and the clones, but as she escaped, she discovers that the facility have put the trigger scent on her own mother. Sarah ends up being taken out by Laura herself, passing away in her arms before X-23 finally gets to escape. But if we really want to dive into the brutality of Wolverine, we can look directly at Weapon X. A large chunk of Wolverine's life was spent being forced to work for the ultra-shady government group known as Weapons Plus/Weapon X. They are the ones that gave Wolverine those shiny adamantium bones that we talked about at the beginning of the list. Not only did they force Wolverine and many others into nasty experiments to create super soldiers, they then hired out those super soldiers to the highest bidders, brainwashing these people into committing terrible atrocities. For example, Wolverine was forced to steal a boy named Frank Simpson and begin programming him to turn him into an enhanced killer. But then later on in life, Wolverine came across Frank in Vietnam as a soldier, and their interaction was anything but pleasant. Wolverine basically put Frank through the ringer, physically and psychologically, breaking him to the point that Frank became a killer and started going by the name Nuke, which is when he became a Daredevil villain.
In the Infinite Crisis event, Connor Kent decides to answer the door, only to find Superboy Prime, who is starting starting to go a little bit off the deep end, and he decides to explain how he is the one true Superboy, and he wants to do that by fighting. And it is intense. Even Krypto gets involved, receiving a kick to the neck from Superboy Prime, and after that little crime against humanity, things get real. Prime beats the snot out of Connor Kent, chucking cars and all manner of things, but Connor had called in the Teen Titans, who in turn call in the Justice Society and the Doom Patrol. That's 28 different heroes. But this only makes things worse. Prime basically is like a kid, and he doesn't know how to control this power properly or even understand what is even happening right now. He starts wiping out heroes, accidentally taking the head off of Panther. He then rips off Risk's arm and wipes out Bushido and Baby Wildebeest with his heat vision while he is crying. It takes a handful of speedsters to then trap Prime in the Speed Force and end the fight. Okay, maybe a bit of a controversial pick here, but Superman Returns has made the list. The movie, I'm talking about the movie. Basically, Lex Luthor has used kryptonite to grow a massive landmass out in the ocean, which leaves Superman completely vulnerable. He lands on the new island, and it's bad news from the get-go. Lex and his goons have already gotten in position on this kind of Krypton-like island, but underneath, embedded into the rocks, is pure kryptonite. Tons of it. So it makes it incredibly easy for Lex Luthor to push Superman down these rocky stairs and then kick him while he's down, literally and figuratively. And then his goons start giving Superman this beating that actually kind of feels pretty scary and real, and I was like not expecting that at all. I don't think I've ever seen Superman so unable to do anything, and then Lex has like this sharp piece of kryptonite that he breaks off in this gasping for air Superman, who then falls off of a cliff. Moving on, John Walker, aka US Agent, is not the most loved character out there, but while he is a bit of like an anti-hero, he's still a hero from time to time. For example, when he answers the call to fight against Norman Osborn and his goons during the events of Siege. In The Mighty Avengers number 36, he attempts to stop the Thunderbolts from stealing Odin's spear. Unfortunately, another USA affiliated bad guy who is slightly crazy is also on the field today, and his name is Nuke, and he is pretty ruthless. Nuke is able to use the spear against US Agent, slicing off both his left arm and left leg. US Agent would go on to be wheelchair bound, refusing any enhanced cybernetics, and somehow he was still actually pretty capable. Moving on to the third spot today, Atlas is a character for DC Comics created by Jack Kirby, joining the comics in the 70s. He was always intended as a kind of anti-hero, and he has more or less played out that way since. But in 2010, Atlas was brainwashed by an unknown villain to attack the Justice League, and he is one of the few characters to absolutely pummel the tar out of Superman. Sure, Superman could be slightly holding back against this fellow hero, but I've always kinda hated that argument because then it makes me think that Superman is just faking it when he gets absolutely rocked, and I feel like that's not the case here. Atlas is taking Superman to the cleaners. They're going hit for hit, but Superman, even with help, he just can't take it, and Atlas eventually knocks him down to the concrete. Now, coming up second to last today, following the events of Original Sin, where Thor becomes unworthy to wield Mjolnir, Odin's son attempts to continue his superhero career in Thor number 1. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't really turn out too well for him when the axe, Jarnbjorn, proves to be a pretty poor substitute for his mighty hammer. In battle with Malekith the Accursed and the Frost Giants, Thor has his arm severed off with his own axe, and he's left to perish at the bottom of the ocean. The new female Thor, who's actually Jane Foster, becomes the wielder of Mjolnir, and it is up to her to defeat Malekith. The original Thor does return with a new metal arm made out of black uru, and initially he wants his hammer back, but then he sees Jane Foster handling it pretty well, and he just decides to drop the Thor title completely and just goes by Odin's son instead. The man was crushed. And finally, in the infamous A Death in the Family story, DC not only slew a Robin, but they did it in the most disturbing way they could have. Jason Todd had disobeyed direct orders from Bruce Wayne to not go near the Joker. The problem was that Jason had just met his birth mother for the first time, who it turned out was a criminal working for the Joker. Also, he's Jason Todd, so he just didn't listen. He went to the warehouse where the Joker and his goons were at with the intention of saving his mom. But in a heartbreaking turn of events, his own mom betrayed him to the Joker to save herself, which of course doesn't actually save her at all. And the Joker leaves her to pass away with Jason anyways. Joker is shown repeatedly beating the snot out of Jason Todd child with a crowbar. It's harrowing. Joker leaves him suffering on the brink with an explosive device, and the hero manages to push through his injuries to get to the door with the help of his mom, only to find out that the Joker had locked them both inside.
The end of the Hellions series has to be one of the most brutal things I've ever read. It was actually painful for me to read. My heart seriously hurt after finishing that series, and I was in tears for honestly most of the last issue. To watch this team of lovable but extremely weird misfits come together over multiple issues throughout this series, only to see many of them slip and self-destruct, was honestly something else. They had found a sense of family, only to lose that newfound family, and with it, for many of them, honestly their sense of hope. It was a brutal ending to what was otherwise honestly an uplifting story. I still can't believe that's how it ended, honestly. Zeb Wells out here just playing with my emotions, playing with my heart. I think the worst character for me in terms of how the story ended for them was honestly Wildchild, who basically decided to just accept that he didn't really belong anywhere and submitted to being in a medicated stupor. It really was tragic. What stories have moved you emotionally? For me, Wildchild's and the Hellions ending overall just literally brought me to tears. I actually struggled to read the pages. That's how much I was crying at the end of this series. It was really heartbreaking and really brutal. This is a traumatic one, or at least it probably was a traumatic one for Wolverine at least. Yep, we're talking about that moment. The moment when Wolverine was permanently separated from his adamantium. What are we talking about here? Divorce, babe. Divorce. Wolverine was divorced basically here from his adamantium, something that initially in the comics was suggested to be part of his mutant power. However, over time, of course, we'd come to learn that the adamantium-coated skeleton that he had, his claws, was not necessarily inherent, but was instead put in place by Weapon X. He did have claws, but they were just bone claws, and then Weapon X basically modified him and coated his whole skeleton in adamantium. When the X-Men faced off against Magneto in space, Magneto used his magnetic mutant powers to manipulate this metallic substance, this adamantium, fully removing it from Wolverine's skeleton. He'd get it back, but the extremely gruesome and painful de-adamantium process would leave its mark, making Wolverine more animalistic soon afterwards. Professor X has a lot of brutal moments in the comics. Honestly, he is tied to many of them because he has done some morally questionable things throughout his comic book history. One of these moments, however, might seem small in comparison to some larger missteps that he's had, but it still shocks me to this day, and I find it honestly quite brutal in a different way, so I'm gonna include it here. We're talking about Professor X admitting his feelings for Jean Grey. This wasn't something that Professor X shared aloud, but just seeing it confessed to, even in a thought bubble, was honestly enough for me. Now granted, at the time, I doubt this would have been as shocking when this comic was released, because it was issue number 3 of X-Men, considering that canon had not yet established that Jean was actually one of the Professor's really first X-Men, who he'd helped when she was only a little kid and he was a young adult. But given the context I had when I read this, yeah, it's a mess. One of the most brutal fights I've seen in a while is the one where Storm faces off against Tarn. Tarn the Uncaring is one of the mutants from Morocco, and he happens to be one of the most upsetting to face. Honestly, because of his mutant powers. Also, he's a mutant of Morocco, so they tend to be made of just tougher stuff in general. But really, what makes his fights in general brutal are, honestly, his powers. Tarn can basically alter folks' genetic makeup, which is exactly what he does to take Storm's powers away after challenging her to a fight, or rather, after insulting her authority as Regent of Morocco, which she interprets basically as a challenge. And honestly, rightfully so. She responds in kind by saying she will see him in the circle for the two of them to duke it out between them for who should sit as regent, or rather, maybe just who should respect who. Now, when they do, Tarn uses his powers to take away Storm's powers and disfigure her, but still she manages to best him by stabbing him in the chest and threatening to end his life by puncturing his heart. Yeah, Storm, even when she doesn't have powers, she's a really amazing fighter, so you should not mess with her. She forces him to yield, and in the end he learns just how strong-willed Storm is and ultimately returns her powers to her, admitting she is of Morocco and perhaps she might even be of a Ment. That's how intense she is.
Now, while Wolverine spent time on the X-Men team, he came into contact with one Dr. Hank McCoy, aka Beast. Hank is one of the 8 smartest people in the world, and being smart in comic books seems to be a pretty easy path to being morally dubious. Don't get me wrong though, Wolverine is not a Boy Scout by any stretch of the imagination, but he still holds on to his morals. for the most part. Wolverine and Beast were actually friends, and Beast stuck with Wolverine during the Schism event, and he was also on the side of the Avengers with Wolverine during the Avengers vs. X-Men event. But people change, and Beast is absolutely one of those people. In order to deal with external threats to the new mutant nation of Krakoa, Beast has taken a position as the chief of the intelligence agency X-Force, which has almost completely cost him his morality. McCoy has chosen some questionably authoritarian actions to guarantee the Krakoan sovereignty, like sabotaging the country of Terra Verde, squirreling away funds to open a space station prison, and interrupting one of Wolverine's resurrections to attach an obedience collar to send him on clandestine missions, all of which was kept secret from the rest of X-Force and the rest of the mutants. This ticked off Wolverine, which in turn ticked off Beast even more. He sent Wolverine on a mission so that he would be captured for an auction that Hank attended, and then he literally showed Wolverine to the afterlife in order to resurrect Logan again in a primitive state and turn him into Weapon X, where Beast sent him on more and more missions. Beast cloned Wolverine, and he used those clones as his own personal bodyguards and hitmen, and man, Beast has just become straight up a villain. No other way to put it. But Beast is nowhere near the most brutal villain that Wolverine has had to face. The Wolverine villain known as Cyber, for example, is one of the only villains to actually terrify Wolverine, with some adamantium-coated skin, toxic claws, and the power to track an individual's brain. And he's like 9 feet tall. In 1994's Wolverine number 79, Cyber is tracking down Wolverine in order to claim his adamantium bones, which he wants to then make a profit from. Unfortunately, at this time, Wolverine actually doesn't have his adamantium bones because Magneto took them away. So when the fight leads to him popping his bone claws, Cyber is a little more than disappointed. But instead of just walking away after this revelation, a cannon just goes off in the distance, and this gives Wolverine the opportunity to slash Cyber across the face. But as soon as the attack happens, Cyber catches Wolverine's fist, and in one stomp, he snaps Wolverine's claws in half, very much like Sabretooth did in Wolverine Origins, like the movie. That event scarred Wolverine, but right after, it made him even question his ability to be a hero in the first place. But moving on from that, the Thing is one of the most powerful heroes in the Marvel Universe, able to stand toe-to-toe with the Hulk in battle. He and Wolverine have had their scrapes, and most of the time, Logan's been on the losing side. In one little altercation taking place in Fantastic Four 1961, issue 374, Wolverine, Ghost Rider, Professor Hulk, and Spider-Man, who had previously taken the place of the Fantastic Four, were hunting for Johnny Storm, who had accidentally destroyed part of Empire State University. Now this led to an altercation between the four heroes and the Fantastic Four, but when Wolverine went to attack Susan Storm, Ben Grimm grabbed the Canadian and slammed him into the ground, calling him an arrogant little creep, because that's just what he does. But Wolverine, in his rage, used all of his might and he slashed Ben across the face, disfiguring the character in a huge way. Now the Thing got his payback as he yelled, "You frickin' little psycho," and then he whacks Wolverine with one punch, sending him flying through a bunch of buildings, but this actually scarred the Thing so bad that it had lasting effects throughout the comics. The post-apocalyptic world featured in the Old Man Logan storyline is one of the best things that Marvel has given us. But it's also one of the most brutal settings they've ever created. It all came to be when the villains decided that instead of fighting their usual villains, who they always lose to, they would instead put themselves up against whatever hero they were actually best suited to face. Now in the case of Wolverine, who is the main character here, that happened to be Mysterio. Mysterio is a master of creating illusions that trick even the senses, and he is almost always defeated by Spider-Man because of his spider sense. But for Logan, his super senses are one of his key traits, so when Mysterio uses his illusions to trick those senses into believing that the X-Mansion was being attacked by Doc Ock, Ulysses Klaue, Strife, and a whole squad of powerful villains, Wolverine believed it wholeheartedly and he held nothing back. Using his claws, he cut through the villains like butter. With all the other X-Men nowhere to be found, it was Wolverine versus everyone, and he was taking 40 different villains to the grave. It was insane. When he finally took down the last one, who was Bullseye, the illusion actually lifted to reveal that these villains were in actuality all his fellow X-Men, who were just caught completely off guard by the sudden attack from one of their own. Now there are a few different characters who often appear in the Wolverine circle, the Wolverine family, you could call them if you wanted to, but if we are counting down a list of brutal moments for the character, then there is one person in particular who needs to be talked about, and his name is Sabretooth. Victor Creed seems to be bad simply because he enjoys it. As a kid, he took the life of his older brother Luther over a piece of pie, and was absolutely ruthless to his younger brother Saul, who he would make a habit of putting a beat down on, particularly on Saul's birthday. When his mutant powers manifested, it only made bringing harm to others even easier for him, and he eventually took out his own father before going on a rampage through 3 Canadian provinces at just 13 years old. He would become a bit of a wanderer throughout his life, moving from different careers that allowed him to take advantage of his power in order to spill more blood. Now he eventually turned his savagery towards Wolverine, who happened to have taken the life of Saul, Sabretooth's younger brother. Sabretooth, in a really sick way, replaced Saul with Wolverine, making it his goal to make Wolverine's life a living hell. On every one of Wolverine's birthdays, he would beat Wolverine to within an inch of his life, and anyone Wolverine welcomed into his life, like those he would fall in love with, also became Victor's newest victims. And speaking of that, Sabretooth doesn't only try to ruin Wolverine's life on his birthdays. Anyone in Wolverine's life can become a target for Sabretooth, and Daken was Wolverine's son, born from Logan's marriage to a woman named Itsu, and the boy inherited his father's mutant abilities, but none of his morality. So in an attempt to gain revenge on his father, Daken teamed up with Sabretooth and the group known as the Red Right Hand, and the group's battle with X-Force culminated in Logan having to take the life of his own son. But with the powers of Wolverine, this is obviously no easy feat. Most people believe Wolverine is practically unkillable, but this is actually not entirely true. He does have 1 or 2 foolproof ways to bring him down, and one of them is water. With Daken leaving his pops no choice, Wolverine is kind of forced to hold his son face down in a puddle until he stops breathing. This moment is intercut with these flash imaginations that Wolverine is having of the life that they could have possibly shared together if things were a bit more normal. Now just as Daken takes his final breath and Logan mournfully is holding his son, Sabretooth appears on the scene, revealing that this has been his intention since he first partnered with Daken. Needless to say, we kinda hate Sabretooth here.